Mike will be joining us here shortly. And at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see Michael's contact information. You can send him an email, or you can visit one of the websites and you can hit the contact page, reach out to him, reach out to the organization, and just kind of discuss, what it is that you or, fellow partners or anything else may need in reaching out. Good afternoon, Mike. How you doing today?
Good. How you doing there, Mike?
Is
it Mike or Michael?
I go by Michael, or it's, whatever. Sometimes I'll be like, I go by Michael, but, everybody always takes a shorthand.
Gotcha. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. It's perfect. Okay. And again, I want to welcome everyone to today's show. And Michael Zannitto, he has 20 plus years with law enforcement. He is a Gulf War combat vet, and also 25 plus years in nursing. And during Michael's time, in combat, in law enforcement, he witnessed things that, he himself went through. And then because of the things that he went through himself, he had the passion about that to better other individuals and give other individuals an avenue to reach out. And he also has his, organizations for the dogs and everything else as well. And I'm going to let, Mike explain that. And again, Mike, good afternoon, good evening. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me, Mike.
Always,
So basically, you kind of hit it in a nutshell. I'm a combat veteran from the first Gulf War.
Thank you for that.
I worked as a nurse before I actually went into law enforcement. I did the reserve thing for a little while because I really wasn't sure about how I wanted to do my career path. I really enjoyed being a nurse. I worked in pediatrics. I worked in emergency rooms all over Southern California. And it was very rewarding, a lot of fun. I felt like I was doing something really good. So I was able to help people. I really focused on the children and the trauma patients type things, if you will. But the big thing was when I got into law enforcement, it kind of opened up some more doors for me as far as helping people. I've kind of been pretty much doing my whole entire adult life serving others. It's in some fashion, whether it was starting out in my juvenile years as a Boy Scout and doing things around the neighborhoods, that kind of stuff, and then going into the military, serving my country, joining the nurse force, taking care of sick people, and then getting in the police department to continue serving my community. I actually served in the city of Anaheim in California, and I retired from the city of Garden Grove in California as well. Grew up in both those towns as a child and graduated from high school in Garden Grove. So it was kind of a neighborhood that I was familiar with, and it kind of gave me some avenues about which direction I wanted to go. Once I actually retired, I kind of went through some things with work, a transition period from retiring. Something happened with me at work where I was going through a lot of stuff, and they always say that, the police department's a brotherhood. Well, I'm kind of an old school guy. I got hired in the 90s. So the brotherhood back then is way different from what the brotherhood is today in police work.
100%.
And I'm probably not going to make a lot of friends saying this kind of stuff, but I'm going to tell you to you straight. The reality is that brotherhood that happened when I was a rookie, in the late 80s, early 90s, doesn't exist like it is today. It's not like that. It's basically a self-serving, it's a cutthroat type thing. A lot of people are doing their thing, and it's one of those kind of things where they don't care who they throw under the bus.
And let me ask you a question real quick. I'm going to cut you off, but in regard to the camaraderie, because that is important, and especially when we have partners that we have to trust if we're both on a call together or being able to rely on that. So if we can't be close and have that camaraderie, it's going to create problems, for the both sides. And not only that, but every call that you're responding to and everything else like that. Now, did that change transpire during your time being active, or did you see that kind of that loss of the brotherhood, the loss of the camaraderie, during the course? Which I know you just touched on as far as one of the causes on you actually stepping out. But, was it during the course, of your service that you started to see, the change, amongst the brothers and sisters of law enforcement?
Looking back at it now, I saw and I identify what the turning point is at that point. But when I was going through that, no, I didn't recognize it. I didn't really see it because I was involved in it. I was part of the brotherhood, if you will. Okay, I wore the same uniform. I did the same job that everybody else did. I think that, and it kind of touches on a little bit on what I'm doing today. Is PTSD is something that has been existent for decades. It was shell shock back in the Vietnam,
Yeah,
and then
change the name of it.
And yeah, I mean, it's had its own thing. I mean, one of the big things that I'm pushing, I'm not trying to get off topic, but one of the big things I'm pushing is it's not a disorder. It's not post-traumatic stress disorder. It's
Right.
post-traumatic stress injury or illness, because disorder is a fake mindset. It's a technique that we build up in our own mindset that we're broken and we can never be fixed. There's something seriously wrong with us. Yeah, there is something wrong with you. You have an emotion because you're human. You have a reaction to an incident that happened because you're human. It's how you recover and how you react to that incident, and then how you start to heal and find that transitioning period to say, it's okay to not be okay right now. So going back to the camaraderie thing, it's one of those things where, and you kind of touched on it, you're going on a call and it's a pretty serious call, and your brothers or sisters in uniform are there, and they have your back because you wear the same uniform. They're there to handle the same situation. They're there to deal with the call, deal with the action, whatever it is, and you guys are all fine. But then you go on to the next call and you go on with someone else, and there's ridicule behind how that call was handled. There's stuff that's said behind the other officers' backs about how that call was handled or how things should have went. Or it's one of those things like if you got someone who's goes to the call and they want to handle the call a certain way. Well, they're not the handling officer, so they will chime in and they'll try to give their 2 cents or try to maybe change the call's direction instead of it being handled the way it should be handled by the handling officer. The camaraderie thing, again, they do the choir practices. I don't know if you're familiar with choir practice, where you go and you get off shift in the morning and you go to a parking lot and you go barbecue and you have a couple of beers and talk about your day and talk smack about other people and whatnot, or you just go home and you go back to your family. But the brotherhood itself is one of those kind of things where, at face value, yeah, there's a brotherhood, and the code of silence, and we're going to protect our own and all that kind of stuff. But that's way back in the day, back when I was a rookie in the early 90s.
And another thing too, I wanted to kind of touch on while we're talking about this, because, and some other friends as well too, Christopher Hoyer and Chris Gregorio, we touch on it a lot as well too, in regard to the senior officers, because if it's not being done at core level, and a lot of times it's kind of hands off for the superiors, the supervisors, whatever the case may be, to where that plays a large role in how it affects the camaraderie amongst the brothers and sisters, within the law enforcement as well. Because if they're not engaging and making things sound okay, going into the PTSD, to where a lot of for decades and for years, and even you still see it in some departments today, unfortunately, to where it's demoralized, or it makes they try to promote it as an individual being weak, or it makes it seem as if an individual won't be able to fulfill or uphold their duties and tasks as officers. But it's how much engaged did you see superior officers back then while you were active, and then did that change as things went along? Because unfortunately, like times have changed a lot to where today our superiors, or it's based on test taking abilities, opposed to individuals that have their time in and those that are like truly qualified to handle situations and things like that. So how much did you see changing during the course of your time in, opposed to your retirement and everything else as well too? Because that did play a large role. I mean, was it back then, was it, I'm not going to say demoralized, but was it frowned upon if individuals did admit that me pulling the baby from the dumpster is bothering me? You know what I mean? Because there's so many things that you see, you know, as being an officer that, you know, civilians, we can't fathom, you know, as far as like what an officer truly sees in their day, in their career. So, I mean, how much does that affect with your superiors?
Well, I'll tell you, it's one of those kind of things where, and I keep saying the old school thing. When I started, if you had a bad call or if you had something that affected you in a negative way, you would have your peer, your brother, your sister that was on that call, or your supervisor that would pull you aside. And this happened to me on several occasions where, you know, my emotion or my attitude changed after a certain call I was on, whether it was a child abuse or it was a child molest or a rape or a dead body or something like that. And I would basically meet that supervisor or meet that brother of mine for a coffee stop after the call. And they basically say, you know what, stop being, excuse the expression, stop being a little bitch. Time to get back in the fight. You know, we got to get over this and be done with it. And it kind of ended there. And that was on the forefront when I was a rookie. And it was one of those kind of things where, you know, you kind of like, whoa, you know, I want to fit in. So I'm going to kind of just let this go. Well,
Exactly.
as me coming in, I mean, I joined after I got back from the Gulf War. So seeing combat already, seeing people, I mean, I was a Navy medic. I was a corpsman. So I saw death and destruction. I saw, you know, catastrophic. I saw people blown up. I mean, yeah, the Gulf War really wasn't anything like the Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff, but I saw combat. I mean, I saw stuff that, you know, not every single human on this planet would be able to see. You can line 15, 20 guys up there, and they're going to react 15, 20 different times or different ways. But it's one of those things, and going back to what you said, is that, you know, the superiors, and even today, even more, I'll tell you what the big problem is today, is that the minute that they identify the PTSI is a problem, they own it. The departments own it. The cities own it. And just like when there's an officer-involved shooting, most departments will pull the officer aside that got involved in the shooting. They will then take their weapon away as evidence and replace that weapon with another weapon, so they don't feel like they're, you know, it gets into their psyche, like, oh my God, my gun got taken away from me. I just got into shooting, and all the adrenaline and everything like that. And then they separate that officer and put them with someone, a peer, and basically take them back to the station to do their investigation and interview and all that kind of stuff. There's departments today, and this is a fact because I know 3 different departments in Southern California that do this today, is that they take the gun away and they don't replace the gun.
Huh.
That does a huge thing up here. Even though you don't want to get into police work to let this identify who you are or make it like, I was not Mike Zannitto police officer. I was Officer Zannitto at the police department. It didn't identify who I am. When I took my badge and my uniform off, I went home to my family, or I went to choir practice with my buddies, or I went to a concert on the weekend or whatever. But it didn't identify who I am. I worked with guys who had time on before I got on that were my training officers and my seniors, if you will, that that job identified who they were. And soon after they retired, they couldn't let it go. It absorbed who they were, and it made them who they were today. Few of them, just like you know as well as I do, life expectancy after, you know, 20, 30 years of police work or 20, 30 years in the fire service or EMS is very, very short. California, you know, I used to get this all the time. They tell me, well, you're retired at 47 years old. Well, I went on an injury. I had a medical retirement. But in California, you retire at 50 years old. And people are like, wow, 50, that's really young. But they don't understand what the body has gone through, what your mind has gone through for those, you know, those 25, 30 years of service, all the stress and all the things. Superiors, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because they want to care about their troops, but yet they also have to be the political figure because they're the head of department, they're the chief of police or chief of fire service or whatever they are. So they still got to answer to the city. But it's one of those kind of things, and I've said this all along, one of the big reasons why I never even tried to even be interested in promoting other than getting out of patrol or doing a different job, but going on to be a sergeant or be a lieutenant. I mean, I personally, in my own personal opinion, I feel like you kind of sell your soul. You're kind of giving up the fact that you're not really a cop anymore, because you can't go out and do the police work anymore. So now you got to be a supervisor, and you can't be a lieutenant and hang out with your buddies that you worked in patrol with 2 years ago and still be their friend. You're the administrator now. So kind of along the lines of what you're saying, is if you got a situation where someone's struggling, okay, if they're one of the good guys or good old boys, if you will, they're going to be taken care of a certain way. If they are not part of the good old boys, then they might be handled a different way. But again, once they identify that situation, they identify that there's a problem with that person, they've got to do something about it, and they own it. They own it forever.
And, it makes perfect sense. And kind of, being ready for this stuff and everything else as well, too, that, we're going to get into the depth as far as, your program and what it provides, the Peacekeepers for Life. But so we've had conversations before to where, you have training when you're going in, but the one training that is never provided is that emotional training to get you ready for what you're about to see. Because like you just said, is that you're seeing so many things, especially being the medic, to where 90% of human beings, they themselves really couldn't process or, deal with a lot of the things that you've been exposed to, a lot of the things that, others have been exposed to. So, how do you mentally, emotionally prepare someone? I mean, because you have to expose them to some type of what to expect, because again, and I know that a majority of individuals that sign up, to be a law enforcement officer, to join the military, especially in today's age, they know the possible risk, but do they really know? Until you are exposed to something, you really can't, have that feeling or know how to deal with that feeling process. And that sequence of processing an emotion is one of the most important aspects of it. And that's why, like with the PTSI and everything else, to where, being able to speak to somebody about that. And, is that something that you feel with what you do with the Peacekeepers for Life that, essentially could be a program that is implemented into law enforcement agencies across the nation for the cadets to better prepare them for, stepping into the career that, they've signed up for? So, I mean, you know where I'm going with this as far as the processing the emotion. I know you really can't, really expose them to the reality of what they're about to go through. But, I mean, is there something of what, as far as what you provide, instead of having people reach out after the fact, is there something that, you can do, or a service that you offer, or a suggestion that you have on how to better ready an individual to process a lot of what they're going to be exposed to during their career?
Well, I'll tell you, it's kind of a multifaceted question. It kind of goes in a couple different directions, but I'll say this: you cannot prepare any human in reality for what to expect and what's going to happen in their career. I've worked with guys who have been in 4, 5, 6 shootings in their 20 plus years. I've worked with guys that have been in 0 shootings and have never even thought about pulling the trigger. I've worked with guys who have seen dead bodies, almost on a weekly basis, and horrific car accidents and whatnot. I personally, on duty as a police officer, I did CPR 7 times on people in my 20 plus years. Okay. And 4 of those were babies. Okay. But I was that guy because I was medically trained. I was that guy that if the call went out, no matter where it was in the city, I would go because I knew I was going to be able to do something than the average, and not better than the average cop, but I was better qualified and I was more confident and comfortable in doing that. As far as preparing them, one of the things that I would say that I think would be really, really important is in the academy, give them give the recruits, give the new potential police officers, potential firefighters and paramedics and that, give them a little tidbit of some mental wellness, or what I call tactical wellness, that kind of prepares them to be ready to, when they are faced with that catastrophic event, or they are faced with that situation that they've never been situated or been thrown in before. Give them a way to identify that is something that's not normal, because police, bottom line is, EMS, first responder, it's not normal. Okay, it's not working in an office in a cubicle, answering the phone and talking about real estate. I'm not saying that, I'm not downplaying the real estate either, but it's not normal. That's why they have a screening process for the police department and the fire department. Today, in California, they didn't used to do full-blown backgrounds and psych tests on firefighters. They used to just go and you go to the academy, you go to your fire tech classes and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Now they're physical agility. Now they're doing full black backgrounds and psychological tests. The psychological screening that happens, and I live in Texas now, but I can only speak for most of my experience in California. The MMPI and the CPI is a complete joke, and I will tell you that straight up. Judge me, whatever, however you want to call it. All it is a specialized personality test for what that type of officer that department is looking for. Okay, I'll give you an example. I took the same MMPI for 3 different police agencies. One of them required a 60-unit minimum college education to be an entry-level police officer to go to the academy for this one. Took the same test. Didn't pass that one because I was deemed a hot dog and too aggressive. Took the same test for another agency and no college required at all. Took it within 6 months of the one that I was deemed a hot dog. And they put the two together because they use them hand in hand to make sure you have consistent answers and that kind of stuff. And this department hired me and said, you fit the profile. This department was significantly more active in an area of Southern California where I was applying. The other one wasn't so active, but they wanted a certain type of officer because they had a certain type of lifestyle that was going on in this particular city. When I ultimately got hired by my first department at Anaheim, basically the psych test wasn't really a relevant testing process for me, because I had done a job where I was a contractor for the county coroner's office, and I was able to get to know a lot of different policies and procedures for police departments within Orange County where I wanted to work. And I happened to pick Anaheim because that was a big department. There was a lot of opportunity, a lot of things I could do. And as a reserve officer, which is what I was going into, I was able to go and do those things as a reserve officer on my own schedule whenever I felt like doing it. I didn't have to worry about promoting or any of that kind of stuff. So when I came to test, I had lots of friends that worked for that department. So they're like, hey, this Mike guy's a great guy. Let's give him a chance. Let's hire him as a reserve. Still had to go through the process and all that kind of stuff. But then when I got done with my reserve period and left nursing and went full-time and ended up going to Garden Grove, I took the same psych test, and they took that first psych test and said, okay, you're a hot dog here, but you fit what we're looking for here. So we're going to hire you. They hired me at Garden Grove. That's where I ended up hiring from. But it was the same psych test. So I answered the questions the same way. It's like 1,200 and something questions for the MMPI and the CPI. But if you look at it in theory, I mean, it asks you like 9 different ways how you love your mother. It asks you 9 different ways. Do you like mustard on your hot dog, or you prefer Poetry magazine over Mechanics magazine?
That's how you became the hot dog guy.
What's that?
That's how you became the hot dog guy. The mustard.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those kind of things that's like you kind of read into those questions. They say don't, because they're true false. You just answer the questions. But then you start thinking, well, if I answer this way, well, maybe they're going to think I'm going to just go out and start shooting people and stuff like that. So back to your question about getting them prepared. One of the things that, and we know that that's going to be one of those things that once they identify that this is important, which, I mean, we're already both very well aware that suicide in the first responder it is beyond epidemic, beyond epidemic. Even more so today with such a divide that's going on in this country. But the preparation for that is basically that you get into the job, you do the job, you go through your training, you go through your probation, and you have to assess yourself if this really is the job that you want to do. You don't do it for the paycheck. The people that are signing up for the job for the paycheck, those are the ones that we're dealing with George Floyd and the power struggle and all that kind of stuff. Okay, you get
There's
into
agencies that pay them $12.50 an hour. I mean, who would sign up for that at $12.50 an hour without the passion to actually go out there and make a
as
difference?
a reserve officer. Okay, I started out at $10 an hour, and I did the same job. My badge said police officer. The only difference between my badge and a full-time badge is the full-time badges had 3 numbers. I had 4 numbers. I wore the same uniform. I did the same job. I went out and did the same thing. And I started at $10 an hour my first year, because that's what I had to do for my my probation and my training. Then eventually the payroll went up, but I still wasn't making the money that cops were making. I wasn't getting overtime. I just got paid straight time because I was a part-time employee. But I didn't get into it because I wanted to make, the money was good. Sure, I bought a house and took care of my family and that kind of stuff. It's important to live, but I didn't get into it for that reason. One of the big things.
I'm about to add Christopher Hoyer to the stream right here.
Oh, great.
He's going to join in here. Hey, Christopher.
What's going on, guys? Sorry,
hey,
Christopher. Waiting on the train.
It's okay. I appreciate you joining in. Today's guest is Mike Zannitto. He has the 20-plus years law enforcement. He was Gulf War combat veteran, 25-plus years as nurse, medic, and he has nonprofits that deal with PTSD and get individuals resources and everything. And he has dogs, which we'll get to cover and all that stuff. He has dog programs as well too for the Paws working dogs and the canine dogs as well. So, hey, Mike, this is Christopher Hoyer. He's retired Phoenix PD. Also author of the book When That Day Comes, Training for the Fight. And that's one of the reasons why I'd kind of like to have, him on this call with us or on this show with us as well. Because a lot of what you do, Chris has dealt with and been affected by. And I kind of wanted to, have you two collaborating together because, what you both do is just a great benefit, to individuals that are active right now, individuals that have retired, individuals really going through, the PTSD, what they call. So.
Great. You go by Chris or Christopher?
Hey guys, sorry about that. I had to reload my thing on just Chris is fine. So okay. Unless I'm in trouble, nice. then it's Christopher usually. So.
All right.
You guys too, man. Thanks.
So basically, what I was saying is that if you look at the preparation stuff, I think it's gonna need to start, especially in this society now. We got the whole millennial thing, and all 3 of us were raised in a different time. Okay, it's pretty clear. When we messed up, we were held accountable for stuff. If we were late for dinner, we got in trouble. And in this day and age, that's going to be a lot of the stuff. But preparing these kids that are starting in law enforcement today or in EMS, it's got to start at the academy. We got to give them some kind of a mindset to start thinking. So it's like an FTO program. You don't learn how to be a cop in FTO program. You get a bunch of different tools to add to your tool belt, and then you form the type of cop you're going to be from FTO training. You learn the basics. Do you agree, Chris?
Absolutely.
You agree with that? Okay. So, oh yeah. There's FTOs that I worked with that were horrible cops. They were horrible cops. They were one direction. They were narc guys. They were traffic guys. They didn't have that big gamut, that big umbrella of being into a bunch of different dynamics of police work. But it was one of those kind of things where I took a piece of each of those, and it could have been attitude, their behaviors, their mannerisms, how they talk to suspects, all tactics, all that kind of stuff. And then I formed my own little way of how I was going to be and what kind of cop I was going to be. When I transitioned from Anaheim as a reserve to Garden Grove, it was a smoother transition than I thought it was going to be, but still I immediately went into it, and it was like they treated me like I was an inexperienced cop because I was a reserve. I was a full-time scab labor, if you will. Okay. But I was still doing the job, whether I was doing it part-time or not. And the unique thing about my situation is while I worked as a nurse, I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, 3 12-hour shifts, and then I worked 3 12s at the police department as a reserve. So I subsequently was working full-time hours at the police department and as a nurse at the same time. And I did that for almost 6 years. So I got a lot of experience. I got a lot of time on the street, if you will. And so when I went to Garden Grove, I needed to learn the Garden Grove way, but it was one of those things where I needed to also understand that I was the new guy and I was a rookie. But with FTO, you take that little piece of each one of them, you put your mind as a sponge. You know, the academy were already stressed out. They basically paid us to get in shape. I mean, there's really no other way to put that. You learn the basics of the laws and all that kind of stuff, but they pay you to get in shape. But when it comes to this mental illness or this tactical wellness, if you will, is that if we can give them something in the academy to let them know that when they're having that bad situation or they have that bad call, that when they go home and they're feeling that, don't go to the fridge and get the beer. Call their buddy and say, hey, can I talk to you about something? Or talk to their wife. I was married most of my time as a cop, but my last couple of years, I got divorced. Typical situation happens with cops and first responders. You know, we work a lot and whatnot, and then we end up, getting divorced. But we don't want to take that stuff home with them. We don't have to talk about the specific call, but we can talk about the fact that, hey, I had a bad day, and this is kind of why. But I don't want to have them, have to experience what it was that I saw at that call. But to be able to just at least put that little situation out and let it all bottle up inside, I think that's real important to have that support system. But as far as what I do and what I'm offering, and let me take that back. What my organization does is we really push the peer support and trauma response team dynamic, and that's kind of a thing where peer support teams, every department that I'm finding in this country, doing this for the last 5 years and talking to different agencies all over the country, they have peer support teams in place. But the dynamic of a peer support thing is, if you think about it, is when you have the incident and you have the critical incident that happens, there's a 24 to 72 hour time frame that debrief, that stress debrief has to happen. That's very important. And it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, is that in the early years, in my early 90s as a rookie, meeting your buddy at the coffee stop saying, hey, stop being a little bitch and let's get back in the fight. It's time to finish out the job. That's not debriefing it. That's not fixing it. Because all that does is push all that stuff down and bottle it up for the next call.
And it prevents you from, speaking out about something else that may bother you on the next incident or the next incident and not further. And that's why I wanted to touch on this so much, is because, it's something that, once we feel, it's kind of, if you get yelled at as a kid about saying something or expressing something, you don't say it again. So the same thing when it comes time for the career. And, Chris and I were, talking about what you just touched on as well, in regard to, when we come home, an incident that we may have, ran into today that is really like laying heavy on my mind and on my heart, not releasing that to them or not being able to have, that support on that side, we have to do that. And we have to, be able to have, that, because it's the support that's closest to us,
Right.
And, and the same thing with, we had a conversation the other day in regard to, instead of, you having to reach out. I had John Hall on. He was a guest on as well too, and he's active law enforcement. And we were talking about reaching out in regard to mental health, to where if something is bothering us, and it's the agencies across the nation. Something has to be put in place. That's why I was kind of talking to you in regard to the training that you offer, is there some kind of, something that can be implemented in? Because what we need to see more of is the superiors, or not even just the superiors, but having somebody in each agency that would call you in there just for a buddy check. Oh, hey, Mike. Hey, Chris, I just want to, just to see how all officers are doing, rather than us having to go in there, in the door saying psych on it, or whatever the case may be. But having that buddy check, in the institution, whether it's like right after roll call, or, at some point, throughout the week, bi-weekly, monthly, just to check the mental health and the wellness, of the brothers and sisters within each agency, so.
Yeah. And there is those things in place to a certain extent, to where there's counselors, there's a department psychologist that is available for those kind of things. There's their peer support counselors for their peers that go and they do that. We talked a little bit about brotherhood in the very beginning of this. The fear, that misnomer, is that, you talk to that guy or girl that you work at your department about something in confidence, and you've got to believe that they're not going to run and go and make that a great story around the department. Okay, there's an old saying in police work: we never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And it's one of those kind of things where if someone's struggling, and then you go and you get in a group of these brothers or sisters together and they start talking about that person struggling, okay, now there's an embarrassment thing, there's a gossip, there's all that kind of stuff. But then there's also that other misnomer, is that if me as the officer who's struggling with a particular incident or something that happened at work, if I come forward and all of a sudden say, hey, that call kind of really messed me up. And now there's that misnomer, or that fear that if I do that, I'm going to be judged by my department. I'm going to be automatically put on admin leave. And pipe in, Chris, if you disagree with something, please. And I'm going to be alienated. And then if I don't recover from this situation, it's kind of goes along the lines about the departments not wanting to identify these things, otherwise they own it, is that if they let me go as a result of this situation, or my PTSI, or my struggle and not being able to recover, they're going to now take my identity away, because now I'm going to get an identification and a badge, but they're not going to give me a gun to carry because I'm no longer safe enough to carry a gun. But guess what? How many cops on the job today only have one gun? Right? So, the mindset's there, is if I got something stuck in my head that I'm not feeling good and I'm struggling with something, and my department just basically dumped on me and said, bye, we no longer need your services anymore. You're not getting checked on by the guys that you're seeing every day. You're not getting that buddy check like you said. Your administration sure isn't doing it, because now you're off the books, out of sight, out of mind. And this is kind of along the lines of something that happened when I fully retired the first time, because I went through a medical retirement, and for 2 years, I had like little or no contact from these guys that were my brothers and sisters there. I have a nickname that, or not a nickname, but it's a thing that guys that I worked with, that would call Mike Zannitto, would give the shirt off his back, would do whatever it takes to help other people all his adult life. And they used to call me, I say, I'm caring to a fault. Okay. I'm a godfather to 2 guys, one at Anaheim and one at Garden Grove, to their kids. Okay. I'm that guy. I am that guy that will give the shirt off his back. And I'm carried to a fault because I'm not worried about boundaries. I'm not worried about the consequences if I go and help someone. If I feel in my heart that I'm doing the right thing, I'm going to do that. But it's one of those kind of things that when I went through that 2 years of that emptiness, I didn't have that brotherhood anymore. And that's where the light really went on. You asked me about, how long that brotherhood and all that. Well, I didn't identify it, but then when I looked back at it after being retired, I looked back and said, the transition was almost 10 years before that, where guys would, you're cool with everybody at work, you talk a little smack and briefing and at calls and that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, you're out of sight, out of mind, and you're gone. But the brotherhood's gone.
Well, can I jump in? Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
The mask is kind of killing me here. So what I figured out when I retired was that I'd go back and I talked to the guys, and they would take me on board, but I could tell that there was like a hesitation in how they wanted to talk to me now. And I think that part of that was because they don't want to hear how great it is for me now that I'm free of all the bullshit, I'm living my best life. I'm living at the beach, and they don't want to hear about it because they're still stuck in the. And then, a lot of these guys. I was on a senior squad, of course, when I left at 20 years. I think our junior guy had 18 years on when I left.
Yeah. No, I
so
totally
these are
get that.
senior
Like
guys for the most part. And
like
so these
you said,
guys are
you're living the dream. Yeah.
right. Yeah. And they're at that stage in their career where they're like, all I can do is all I want to just get out of here. I don't want any more part of this. I got to get through my drop program, be done. We're thrilled to death that you're having a ball out there and whatever you're doing, but we really don't want to hear about it. So I kind of took away from that I'm no longer part of that group. They're not depending on me to save their life, and I'm not depending on them to save my life. So you kind of lose that. You lose a large part of that brotherhood, not only with your squad, but your own personal identity. And then having to face the idea. Because the thing that hit me really hard was, knowing that I don't have the ability to go hands on and chase bad guys anymore, which only lasted for about 5 minutes. But I realized I'm like,
yeah,
do I even want to anymore? Of course, And then when the first time you're at the grocery store and you see something going down, you're like, wait, nope, I'm not that guy anymore. And then nobody knows that that's what you did for so long. And the truth of the matter is, what I had to face for myself was nobody even cares. I mean, as shitty as it is to face that, nobody gives a shit.
That's the sad truth, though.
And it was.
That's the sad truth, though. It really is.
When you work as hard as I did, and you want to be, you want to be that guy all the time, and then you don't have it anymore. It's like, well, now what do I do? Well, now you do exactly what I'm doing. You live your best life someplace else, So
yeah, see, you kind of. No, go ahead. Finish that.
Well, I just one thing I want to touch on, rewinding a little bit, talking about the PTSI and the stressors of the job. I think that we do have plans in place, which are great. And don't get me wrong, correct me if I'm wrong with this whole thing, but what I've seen, and from my own personal experiences on the job and after, it's always been reactive. And we're very, very non-proactive about these kinds of things. I think if we have something in place, because, I know you guys all know this. What is it, like 60 hours of firearms training and 4 hours of wellness training? What are we doing all day long? We're not shooting people all day. We're talking to people all day. So obviously the balance is completely way off. So anyway, that was my whole thing on that. So
no, you're right on, and you're actually touching on some stuff that where my organization is really thinking about that line is that if you think about like the military, for example, okay. And I don't know what your military background is. If you guys, okay. So for the military, we go to boot camp. We basically learn how to be a Navy guy, a Marine, an Army soldier, whatever service we join. Okay. We do it for 8 to 10 weeks, whatever it is. Okay. You learn, you go through training. Then you go to your school for your specialized school. Then you go and you continue to constantly train in that. If you go to combat, you get sent to your unit, you go in combat. Then when it comes time for you to get out, the transition period, it's a joke. It's a complete joke. Okay. Police department, what do? You do an exit interview, and maybe they have a retirement plan if your wife plans it for you, right? Okay. So it's a joke. So touching on with my organization is that I don't just focus on first responders. I go even further back to the veterans, because where do veterans go when they get out of their military service? EMS, fire, police, all those jobs, okay? And in order to get hired as a cop, they can't come back from Afghanistan with PTSD and go test and get hired as a police officer.
Right.
If there's any mention of that, they're not going to be able to. So what do? They push it down. And they basically make whatever they need to make happen to get that job, to get that badge, and get that uniform. It's not a bad thing, but it's something that this is why it's important for them to look at it on the entry level point, because they need to prepare for that, because there's going to be things that are going to trigger, that are going to happen, that can happen their first week, their first hour that they're on the job, or 5-10 years from down the road. Okay. So you find something that's going to be a way to deal with that before it happens, to prepare yourself. Kind of like with FTO training, they tell you about, try to read body language and, head on a swivel, 360 all the time, eyes in the back of your head, always on, hyper vigilant, whatever terms you want to throw out there. But we get those guys that get in there and they have their incident and they knock it down. If they're on probation, that's a whole other animal. They don't want to say that they're having struggles, because guess what? Probation, bye, we don't need you anymore. And they can do that with no reason. Okay, they call it the terms looby. No longer need your services.
Hey, Mike, let me ask you a question on that. I know Michael and I talked about this, I think it was 2 times ago. Somebody asked me, it might have been you, Mike, I'm not sure. I can't remember who asked me, but anyway. So my really nasty last critical incident I got to, 2016, somebody asked me if I had that same incident with a year on, how different would my reaction have been versus when my 18th year on? And that was a fascinating question to me. And I was like, wow, I never really even thought about that. Because, don't get me wrong, I had 2 critical incidents back to back, year on and 2 years on. But they really weren't that big of a deal in the bigger scope of things.
Right.
So I kind of dealt with them as they were. And it wasn't until my 18th year, like I said, when I got in the really bad one, when it wasn't, and I obviously knew already that it wasn't just that incident. It was all the other combination of all the other bad stuff that I had seen. But again, if I had that one major thing where it was a really nasty gunfight, officer ambushed, officer killed, all of that with that first year on, how much more resilient would I be now, or how much less able to cope with that would I be now? You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, and
it's huge. And that's one of the reasons I was going to touch base on this with Mike, is because, with what he's seen being a medic, again, it's not something that the normal human being is going to be exposed to or even witness in their lifetime. And then the same thing with law enforcement. Not every law enforcement officer is going to, have a critical incident or be a part of, officer involved shooting. So, when Mike, his provisions, his organization of the provisions, how much of that, and again, no matter how much training somebody receives, can you really ready someone for that type of moment? But in the same sense, like you just, said, Christopher, to where, the difference between the first involvement and the second, it may be a different level of intensity, let's just say, but, mentally being prepared that. And another thing I want to kind of talk to you about as well, Mike, is that, Chris, during one of our broadcasts, was talking about how, one of his buddies in Phoenix or over in Arizona, made the comment that they know that they're never going to draw their firearm. So, and again, and that's why I wanted to, have you on here and kind of discuss this, because, part of that preparation is going to see if somebody, mentally would, not necessarily like take a life, but still draw a firearm and be mentally prepared, emotionally stable enough to discharge firearm.
Before COVID and before George Floyd, that would be a whole other situation. Okay? That would be a whole other situation. And that question would just blow up. It's one of those things where you literally, kind of like what Chris just said about, how would you handle it when you were 2 years on the job, or how would you handle it now that you got, 18 years on the job? There's cops on the street working today that are second guessing pulling the trigger, even in a legitimately justified situation today. And that's why we have over 349 cops in this country killed since January 1st. Okay.
That's one of the things too. And I just want to, Chris Gregoria just joined, and he's law enforcement in the Northwest. And, with what you just said, especially with how things have changed with George Floyd and everything else too, he's in an area, Chris is in an area that is kind of like heavily, law enforcement's facing a lot of scrutiny and everything else. And it makes that, And one of the comments I made to Chris is, how much more on your toes. I mean, every law enforcement officer, we always know that there's going to be a risk with us going into every incident. But when you have those other stressors added on, as you just said, Mike, to where, how much more on your toes is an officer going to be, or how much more restrictive are they about second guessing themselves? Because that's going to be, that hesitation factor, it plays a large role. So, in what you're going into and mentally preparing somebody for that, is there a way to kind of, I'm not going to say really test for it, but, kind of dig in? Is there a psyche vow that, could actually distinguish whether, because again, if you're partnered up with somebody and they really weren't mentally prepared to go out there and really be, your partner as far as, backup. And, Christopher and I were talking about this as well too, where, me knowing that my partner has my back no matter what, but if we have that partner that isn't going to discharge firearm and, we're in an officer involved shooting, how much does that play into, as far as that mental preparedness goes?
All right, welcome, Chris. How you doing? So,
what's up, brother? How are you?
The preparation thing, it's huge. Okay, and again, with my organization, what my goal and my main mission is, and I don't sugarcoat things. Okay, I was born in upstate New York, raised in Southern California. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. A lot of times I'll open my mouth and I'll have to put both feet in my mouth because that just completely floors people. Okay, but when I go and talk about these things, I give the disclaimer. I'm not going to sugarcoat these things. You're going to hear F-bombs. You're going to hear, you're going to hear the streets and trenches perspective. And with my background, I can go into a hospital and talk to doctors and nurses because I worked in hospitals. I can go into the police department and talk to cops because I was a cop. I can go to a SWAT team and go talk. I was on the SWAT team. So I can go to these different dynamics and bring them relatable stuff. But my goal is not to tell them about what this great and all these things that I've done. Okay, because I'll tell you, I'm very humbled to have been exposed to the things that I've seen and survived them. So now my time is now my last life's mission today as an adult is I am now going forward to be able to educate and advocate for those who suffer in silence. I could easily I have a master's degree in psychophysiology. I could easily go and get my Ph.D. and go be a counselor. But guess what? I only get one patient an hour for 6 or 8 hours in a day. But if I can go and speak at a conference full of chiefs of police from all over the country, or a bunch of advanced officers doing training, or a bunch of firemen, and I go and I tell them about things that, we're human. We put our pants on like everybody else. We wear a badge. We do a job. We're going to get screwed up by our jobs. There's going to be something bad's going to happen. We're going to get hurt. We have the potential of getting hurt. Along the lines of what you were saying, Chris, is that, this may not be a job for everybody. But it's one of those kind of things where if you tell them that and let them know, a lot of departments don't even have some of the simple peer groups, peer support groups, or trauma support teams that are updated to what it needs to be today. I'm not saying that they've had Phoenix has a peer support group. They have a function for that. But I personally had lunch with the police chief about 6 months ago, and he tells me it's archaic. It's outdated. Okay. It needs work. But in confidence, it's one of those things where once they identify that they have a problem, they're going to have to be able to own it and do something with it. Departments don't want to do that. So the education and advocacy part is get the word out to the masses and say, look, there's a problem in this business. There's a potential for you to get hurt or injured, or something's going to happen to your psyche or your mental status, but it's okay to ask for help because we care about what happens to you after fact. Retirement, same thing. After you retire, that brotherhood's over with. Like Chris said, it was a big struggle about not being able to, see my brothers anymore. You touched on it, Mike, about, don't have anything in common, or Chris, I'm sorry. you don't have anything in common anymore. We don't want to hear about your living the dream and stuff. Well, guess what? I tell people about my living the dream and how I moved out of California and moved into Texas, into America. Okay, I live in America now. I don't have a governor that hates the people. All right, but I'm happy, and there's things that I'm now doing in my life that make me happy. So I don't have to think about all those crappy things that I had to deal with when I was on the job. But there's guys, like you said, Chris, there's guys that don't want to hear that. But I'm not doing it to throw it in their face. I'm doing it to let them know that, hey, there is life after this job. This job doesn't have to absorb you and define who you are. It doesn't make so what? I was a Navy corpsman. Big deal. Saw death, all that kind of stuff. Big deal. Doesn't make me any better than anybody else that I talk to.
But it makes you ready to provide them insight.
Exactly. And it lets them know from the perspective is that I'm their peer. Even the chiefs were cops. They were cops once. Most of them forgot about when they were cops, but they were cops once. All right. But it's one of those kind of things where I can give them relatable information and say, look, it's okay. There's a struggle in your department. And there's guys that will go through their whole 20 years and you'll never even know there's anything wrong with them. And the week after they retire, they eat their gun.
Yeah, and I want to bring this up. So Chris Gregorio, with him being, in Northwest, and he kind of touched us on it during the broadcast and everything else. So,
I'm listening. Let me let my dog in. I'm listening.
It's okay. So, excuse me. With those guys and them putting in 12, 15-hour days to where especially with the riots going on, excuse me, I'm sorry. But especially with the riots going on to where they really don't have that time for that mental flush or that outreach, talk to the fellow brothers and sisters, so Chris, if you want to touch on this and I know that you kind of, keep your basket, cleared, but, within your department, how do you see other brothers and sisters, finding that time to, go talk to someone or really admit that they're having a problem? Because, with what you do and the hours put in by, the fellow brothers and sisters, the time itself on top of the things that you see during that time has to weigh heavy on, a lot of the officers. So, what do you see the others doing to try to reach out, or are they able to reach out, or what are the superiors doing to do that buddy check and to make sure that everybody, is at their very best?
I guess I would say this is that the reality is that they're not taking care of themselves. They're burying it. They are just driving on with the mission, right? That doesn't bug me. It'll catch me later, maybe. But and to your point of the leaders and the administration stuff like that, checking on officers, I don't believe that's a thing either. I think that they've got so much on their plates. That's just, they talk about it, but there's too much going on that they don't have the ability to reach down to the small level. So I think that it's more of a grassroots thing. I reached out to, I was with somebody earlier that seemed to be struggling, and I started asking some questions, and lo and behold, there's some issues. And being part of our peer support program here, I was able to, work on getting some resources and things like that. So that I think it more relies on having that credibility within your peers. As Mike was saying, it's more of a peer thing than a leadership thing. Than a titled leadership thing, right? More than just the sergeants or lieutenants, but people that have been around a little while, and to recognize those things and to have the understanding and or courage to reach out, right? When we talk about these things on the street all the time, it's normal to go to some of these crisis calls and be like, "Hey, man, are you suicidal?" Just to bluntly say it out like that. You don't want to beat around the bush. You're like, "Hey, man, you thinking about hurting yourself, or you trying to kill yourself, or what's the deal here?" And I think that we, generally speaking, I think we kind of toe tap around that within our place of business, because we don't want to show that chink in the armor. We don't want to show somebody, hey, maybe you're struggling. And I'm kind of an advocate of sometimes I'll throw myself under the bus a little bit. Sometimes it's a legitimate thing, and sometimes, you kind of game it a little bit and be like, "Hey, man, I'm having a tough time or whatever, and you try to say these things so that you show some vulnerability to folks so that they can feel more open to opening up and sharing. Hey, I'm going to go see a counselor next week, something like that. And I think that it's more going to evolve to make it more normalized, to start it in the roll call rooms, in the write-up rooms, BSing about it, without it having to be a serious thing where I'm actually, hey, I need to talk to somebody. When I can say, hey, man, that call that we were just on, man, that kind of messed me up a little bit, man. And, this kid or whatever that, gave CPR and it didn't work out. How about you, man? Am I the only one that's kind of struggling with this? And I think that that's the only way from the senior vets to the new guys and gals to say, hey, that's okay to have these conversations and to say something actually affected you. I think it shows that you're human.
100%. And then Mike, so, with what Chris just said, I guess the big question is, Chris, touched on it, perfect as far as a lot of times when, we let our fellow brothers and sisters know that, hey, we are vulnerable too. And, things affect us too. But, how do you drive into somebody that it's okay to talk about things, or it's okay to admit that this just bothered me? So, I mean, is it part of, your program, or is it one of the things to where it's kind of always going to be up to, the individual themselves to be ready to talk about or be ready to address, certain issues?
Critical incident stress debriefing, or CISD. It is critical for every first responder element, dynamic, whatever company, even in the private sector. It is critical to this whole tackling this mental wellness thing. It's critical. I mean, it's not rocket science. It doesn't take a PhD to even be able to tell you that. And Chris just kind of hit the nail on the head. It's more peer related. Okay. Management doesn't need to be involved in it. Okay. In fact, my organization strongly discourages management to be involved in it, because people will talk more freely and open if they're not in fear of being judged or being alienated or being identified as a problem child now. Okay. So when you do the critical incident stress debrief, it's critical that you do it within 24 to 72 hours, not an hour after the incident happened, not the night when it's an officer involved shooting and the DA shooting team clears your station and now you go talk about what just happened. No, your adrenaline's you're still all those endorphins and still going up. You don't go to the bar and go get shit faced with your buddies and go have a cocktail. You go home. If you got a family, go home to your family. If you need to go take a drive, fine, go take a drive. But that critical incident stress debriefing needs to happen on the peer level, but every single person involved in that call or that incident needs to be involved. And that includes the dispatcher who took the phone call, the forensic specialist who came and took fingerprints or took pictures of the scene, the handling officers, obviously. Okay. And then you have to have a facilitator. And if it's a police department, most of them will have a peer support person that'll be there. And there's 5 simple rules that you want to do that you set that stage for the group. And they're very generic, and each department, depending on how they want to handle it, they can kind of branch off of those five things. But it's one of those things where you make it clear that no one in the room is going to be judged. It's your chance to basically talk about how that call or that incident affected you and what you did to deal with that effect. Okay. And then you go from there. The facilitator, let's say Chris is running this peer group. Chris is going to be doing nothing but focusing on being the moderator, being the person that's going to be basically, if someone says, like, oh, why are you being a little bitch? Why are you crying? Chris is going to be the one to stop that. Chris is going to be the one to basically put that person that's doing that on notice. Say, look, this is not that kind of place. We don't want to judge it. If you have a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, yeah. Chris, you have something? No?
Try to pick my phone.
Sorry, I'm getting ready to exit my train here. I want to pick up this conversation, but really good stuff. But I got to buy out really quick. I'll try to get back on as soon as I get home. So
Okay, yes, sir.
But yeah, thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it very much. Cool.
Always.
All right,
Thank you
guys.
for joining. Bye.
I think
Right
we'll
on,
be here,
thanks.
bud. Thanks. All right. So then you got the thing where the peer support is going on. They're talking about the incident. You're not doing it to rip off the Band-Aid and rehash that what just happened, but it's a chance for raw emotions to come out. It's a chance for someone that is struggling with that incident to talk about what it is, and it's relatable because you've got the dispatcher who took the call in there. You've got the supervisor that showed up, okay, and the supervisor is also may or may not be struggling. But part of those 5 rules that you got to put down is that this is not a judgmental place. Nobody's going to be judged. Nothing's going to be happening. But also the facilitator of that group needs to be looking at body language, needs to be looking and watching around the room of the people that are in the room that aren't saying anything, that get emotional about what they're saying or pouring out their emotions and feelings. And then after it's over, go to that person and say, hey, just want to make sure you're okay. Here's my number so you can call me. Here's a way to get in touch with me. Or do you have a support system to go talk to somebody?
And then, do you make it? Does the moderator make it to where everyone has to share? I mean, I know you're saying like kind of watching the body language to see about individuals that aren't like speaking up or anything, but do you try to make it to where the moderator at least goes around the room and I'm not going to say forces people to speak, but you still want to hear everybody's take on what had happened and things like that. So, I mean, is that something the moderator controls to make sure that it's done, or do they kind of feel it out, or what are your suggestions on, upholding those 5 rules?
In the critical incident dynamic, in the theory behind it, is that you want to make it a comfortable environment that if anybody in that room is struggling, anybody in that room can talk. Anybody in that room can say exactly what they want to say. If they want to say that call really fucked me up, and they've never said the word "fuck" in front of you, like, oh my god, it's human nature for us to react like that. But it's an opportunity for those people to say what they got to say, what's on their mind. For the facilitator or the moderator to say, hey, okay, let's go around the room. Does everybody have anything to say? I personally don't like to run those. There are some that I've been in where the moderator says, okay, here's your 2 minutes. Go ahead and say whatever you got to say. I don't like that. I've been in ones that lasted 15 minutes. I did one in Chicago about a month and a half ago. They actually asked me to come in and do one. 6.5 hours this thing went. There were 17 people in the room. 6.5 hours. We took breaks because we needed to take breaks. People were just going crazy. But it was an officer involved, murder-suicide. Okay? And it was one of those kind of things where it was a smaller agency, and it hit home a lot of people. And those 17 people in the room, 13 of them talked. The other 4 didn't really have anything to say. They kind of just sat there and just kind of let things happen. But it was one of those kind of things where you just kind of give the time. Now, there are going to be times where people are going to talk and just talk and talk and talk and talk. That's where the moderator comes into play and whatnot. But you want to give those people an opportunity. That's why it's so important to not do this too soon, like within, an hour or 2 or 3 or 4 hours of that, because the adrenaline's still, or too late. It's better to do one and not do one if it's late, but it's better to do it between that, and it's recommended between that 24, 72, 96 hours max kind of thing. So then it's still kind of fresh and the emotions are still kind of raw. You don't allow any alcohol. So if someone's been drinking that night, you need to, maybe pull them aside and say, hey, you've been drinking. It's probably not a good idea for you to be there, that kind of thing. And it's not to alienate them. It's just, you want to have them raw. You want to have them, sober and clean and ready to focus on what needs to be done.
Right. And then, so after the initial, do you do follow-ups, especially if, being a moderator, again, because you're able to, your whole focus is on the well-being of everyone in the room, watching their mannerisms, listening to the tone and everything else. Do you do follow-ups with that? Do you suggest follow-ups, or do you just kind of do a buddy check on the ones that you felt were kind of really bothered by the incident? What are your suggestions on that?
That's a tough one because you as the moderator, you're kind of watching the whole room and listening to everything that's being said. But it's one of those kind of things where unless you personally know these people, like dispatchers, for example, we talk to dispatchers on the computer. most of the time. We don't go and have barbecues. The dispatcher, we may see them at a Christmas party, that kind of stuff. So we may not really know their personality all that much because now we're face to face with them. So a follow-up thing with them could be threatening to them. Me as the officer or as the peer person basically coming to them. It's like maybe now I'm trying to single them out. But when you're moderating and you're looking and you're picking up on that body language, it's one of those kind of things where, and one of the number one rule is everything you say in the room is confidential. The only time it's ever going to get out is if you come in the room and say, I'm going to go home and I'm going to kill myself. We can't ignore that. We can't, just like any other street cop, someone says they're going to kill themselves, you got to do something about it. You have to have some kind of an action. But the body language of someone that says, hey, I'm going to go home and kill themselves, be like, no, I don't want to talk. I'm fine. And some tears coming down their face. I'm fine. Just nonchalant, whatnot. You watch those and you see how their mannerisms are. But the follow-up part would be more like, okay, pull them aside, say after the fact and say, look, I just want to make sure that you were able to talk about everything and you were able to get everything off your chest you needed to talk about today. Here's my name, here's my number, here's my card. Call me if you got something else you want to talk, and I'm going to check up on you every couple of days. You okay with that? And then you kind of just let them go with that. That works for me. It may not work for Chris and his department, but that works for me, and it's worked for me when I've done these other ones. Because then that opens up that door, and it shows that person, instead of me being in charge of that group, it shows me now humanizing myself as now I'm a person who really cares about what happened to them after this critical incident we just went, the debriefing that we just went through. So now they matter beyond just that debriefing. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And then Chris, on one of our broadcasts actually shared, he was on his way home, and he and another officer, happened to, come by an auto accident and everything else like there. And they, stopped the individual and, they ended up dying in their arms and everything. And, Chris shared his name and number with the guy to, hey, reach out to where, it is critical. And I'm glad you just said that too. Like, being the moderator, it's the same way to where, Chris, it was a blessing that he was able to kind of pick up on that gentleman, that officer's, mannerisms and, maybe their tone or just the way that they're acting. Hey, you don't have to talk now, but hey, here's my number. The same thing with moderating that group to where, you see that one individual that, hey, especially in a group setting, because you're, 9 times out of 10, you're going to run into that individual that really isn't comfortable about talking about it, in the group setting per se, but they do want to talk about it, so being able to pick up on that, it's vital and it's important. So and then, Chris touched on it as well too. And I know Chris is passionate about, making sure that, mental wellness and everything else is, at the peak. And
yeah. The other problem, go ahead, Chris.
We can't hear you.
No volume, Chris. No volume. Nope, no volume.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go, Chris.
Okay. Sorry about that, gents. It came unplugged. 2 things is, one, I think that as far as the CISM stuff, we tend to focus on serious incidents where there's an OIS or some baby fatality or something like that, not just necessarily the things where there's a horrible DV and maybe some some gangbanger shooting or something that we generally seem to minimize the emotional toll that it has. And I think to your point, Mike, that we need to have those things. We need to normalize that on more than rather just these macro type of incidents and start bringing it down to a lower level. And then to piggyback on what you're saying as far as reaching out, the CISM portion, I think, is fantastic. It gives people kind of a group setting for whoever's involved in this thing. And I love your idea of having the dispatchers and everybody that's involved in that, because I think that's important. I was on a call earlier this morning where a dispatcher said that, they don't get to see these things, but I almost think that it's even worse for them because they go to the worst places in their head. Their imagination takes over whatever these scenes must be like, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that that's a super critical piece. Number one, it goes back to normalizing it, being able to show that emotion for the example that Mike gave, where a guy's just like, I'm kind of fine, but I'm tearing up a little bit. And maybe he is or he isn't, but at least they're being vulnerable enough to show you that they have that emotion, right? And then you can start to address that. And if it's something that's not going to happen in that CISM session, I don't know. I think, you were saying, Mike, it kind of depends on how you do those follow-ups. That's kind of just an evaluation period, right? Now maybe I can take you off the side. Hey, brother, I'm here for you. Here's a number for somebody else, because we're not going to fix any problems in those things, right? We're just kind of processing, helping people process this situation, this call that they were on, rather than trying to help them in any way, so that we can get them, like I said, talking to somebody earlier, recognize something, and I got them some numbers to be able to talk to somebody else. And I happen to be very good friends with this person, but understanding that there's so much dynamic stuff that's going on in their professional and personal life that maybe not even be open to, as good friends as we are, to open up to me in the most vulnerable ways.
Right. You're gonna get, instead of letting it bottle up, if you don't have it, then what's your out? Alcohol, sex addiction, porn, all that.
Gambling.
Gambling, cheating on your spouse, all that crap that is not healthy. Because what is it? It's Band-Aid therapy. It's not
self-destruction.
Exactly. It's self-destruction. Because what are the three things in police work? The 3 B's: booze, broads, and bills. Okay. With mental health, it's all of those things, but it's on a magnified schedule or a scale. I mean, it's like catastrophe, even worse. And it's one of those things where if you don't have an out, a vice, and I don't mean alcohol in that, I mean, it's going to the gym it's not enough. Pumping iron, all that, sure, it's great for healthy and all that kind of stuff. But we touched on it very early in this podcast, is that what is something that we can do to basically, I just lost my train of thought. So you have a vice and you have an out. Okay. So what is it that we can do to make it so we don't struggle with it as much? Well, it's simple stuff as self-care, real important self-care. Obviously the water, the diet, exercise, that kind of stuff and whatnot. But having outside vices outside of the police department, so you don't let that job self-absorb you, and force yourself to identify who it is. I had 2 rules when I got into police work. It was going to be fun, and I was going to look forward to going to work. When it wasn't fun anymore and I didn't want to go to work anymore, I needed to get out and find something else to do. If it was 5 years, 15, 25, whatever. But the day that happened, I needed to get out, because now my mind's not in it. My heart's not in it anymore. And that's when I'm a danger to the job. I'm a danger to my brothers and sisters. I'm a danger to myself. And then guess what? My kids get to grow up with no dad. And that's not okay. Okay? The self-care thing, it's critical. And Chris hit the nail on the head. You don't have self-care, you can't help anybody else. You can't even begin to be there and be supportive of anybody else until you have your own self-care. Get your own shit together first. Okay? Which leads me into the next thing. Codependency has no place in the mental wellness arena. Okay? There are so many people out there in my military career and my police work. There's so many counselors that I would go and talk to. And they were really young, a lot younger than me. None of them had any police experience, nursing experience, or whatever it was that I was talking to. But guess what? They had a really nice wall of certificates and diplomas that they had. All right. The VA is a really big one. The VA has these guys that weren't in the military that are doing counseling for veterans that are suffering from PTSD. And that right there is killing the veteran community, because they don't have the experience. They don't have the relatable compassion, if you will. Chris is a very passionate guy. You mentioned that. He does the peer stuff the way he does. He's a young guy, though. Okay? Chris isn't going to have all the answers. I'm an older guy. I'm not going to have all the answers. The minute we know everything, it's time for us to go. Let God take us, and it's all over with. I'm constantly learning. Okay? Another nickname, IKEA. I know everything, asshole. Because I would always have the last word. Okay? But a lot of times I would say what I felt, and other people would come up to me and go, man, you had the balls to say what I've been thinking. Kind of like the long, not to get the political, but, everybody says Trump said what, majority of the country felt. Okay. But it's one of those kind of things. I'm that guy that will say what's on my mind. So when I do these talks, when I talk about things and push this critical incident stress debriefing, I tell them, I say, look, it's important to have this dynamic, and then you can branch off of it. But the base is there. The base is here. You guys do it a similar way. Your department, Chris, you kind of touched on it. Okay, the follow-up thing is real important. But then being that moderator and sitting there and going, okay, these three right here said a whole bunch of stuff. They're probably going to be better at recovering from this incident than these four over here. So now I got to focus and figure out how I'm going to approach these four over here and go talk to them afterwards. And they may be, screw you. I don't need anything. I'm good. The sergeant said I had to go, or they were going to give me days off, send me to the shrink. Okay. You still want those guys in there, because then you can identify that there's a problem. So when you see them a week later and say, hey, dude, how you doing? How was your days off? Or how was your vacation? And that little stuff right there might open the door for them to talk. Agree, Chris?
Yeah, very much so. And I think that on the opposite side of that is sometimes it's super important to say the things that nobody else is wanting to talk about. But when you're talking about the peer support thing, sometimes it's good to just have a talk, not say much of anything, and then just sit here like this.
Listen.
And not say anything, right? Because it might take 2 or 3 minutes for them to crack. But, sometimes they're looking for the easy way out of these things, right? And what's the easy way out of these things? For me to start running my fat gums, right? But if I just sit here and I look non-judgmental, and I just look, hey, man, I'm here for you. Young lady, I'm here for you. At some point, the uncomfortableness will beat them, right? Without having to do much of anything. The uncomfortability of just sitting there in silence, hanging out comes, man, my life sucks right now. And then, they pop the top, and then it just comes out like a waterfall. But to what Mike's saying, the credibility of the follow, you have to consistently do that, right? Because with cops, we're a weird bunch. Once you break that, you'll never get it back. And then you've screwed it for anybody else that might want to help these individuals, right? They're done. Hey, this person said they were here for me, but, they called me twice, and that was it. After my incident, somebody called me every once in a while, and very disingenuous. And it got to the point where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm good. All right, bye. Right. So there has to be credibility built up in there.
It's
so
almost like they had it on their calendar to make sure that they followed up with you. It's just a follow.
Yeah, kind of, but you have to, I think that another super important part of it is that you have to pair somebody with the right person. Kind of what Mike was saying with the counselors. There's some of those people. Look, I talked to somebody that has no law enforcement experience, no military experience, and just naturally, my civilian encounter it helped me come to resolution with a lot of my military stuff that I didn't even realize was necessarily there. And it just happened very organically. But that's a very rare thing. There's a fantastic doctor down in California near Chris, Doc Shauna Springer. She's kind of hitting it big on the national level with the Marines and the SOCOM community. Again, no relative experience. But she is so relatable. She's so open. She's vulnerable, and she exudes credibility through her pores without trying. You get a lot of these people that try to pitch you, hey, I've done this, I've done that, or I've got this certificate or this doctorate. You're just like, okay, you're trying to oversell. That's like these guys that come back from the war or whatever, like, oh, I did all this stuff. 99%, I'm like, yeah, okay, buddy. Right? The more you try to talk yourself up, the less credible you probably are. Not all the time, but as a large majority rule.
Yeah, that just kind of goes hand in hand with, like you said, the credibility stuff. Is that, when we go and talk, and I'll use an example. I was talking at a conference last year, in Chicago again, and there was about 350 plus police and fire chiefs, and it was a national conference for basically EMS and first responder leaders, the leadership conference kind of thing. And I went in and started talking about how important peer support and the difference between a peer support team and a trauma response team is. And I kind of touched on that a little bit about how you can't put them together, but they can work together, but not be one, if you will. Peer support is for basically the people who do the work, who were involved in the incident. The trauma response is basically to deal with that, and then also the dynamic of everybody else that was involved in that. Your victims, your family, your witnesses, all that kind of stuff. And then to take that dynamic and then mold it in together. Coffee break, about an hour into the conference, I get two chiefs, one from the East Coast and one from the West Coast. The West Coast one happened to be from California. Came up to me and says, you know what? There were a few things that you said there that we never even thought of to even having that dynamic. I walked away. I thought in my mind, I just saved 2 lives. Because I just had 2 departments that took what it was that I was trying to get my point across, and they're going to take it back to their department and try to do that. Whether it's successful or not, it did that. So it goes back to what I was saying about the counseling thing. I could go get my PhD and go be a counselor, but then I'm only going to talk to 6 or 8 people a day. But if I go to a group of people or a conference and talk to a big dynamic of people, they take a little bit of everything, like FTO program, take a little bit of everything of what I talk about and take it back to their departments and implement things. Now they're working towards a solution instead of just saying, we're going to reactionary. I think you said that earlier, Chris, is that, they're reactionary. They don't plan ahead. In police work, we always plan and we're always thinking about, okay, if that guy comes out of that car with a gun, how am I going to react to it? Well, if that guy comes out with a gun and sticks it in his mouth and pulls the trigger, how am I going to react to it? Most cops aren't going to think like that. Most cops are just thinking, oh, he's coming out with a gun. Am I going to shoot him or what am I going to do? No, he's going to put that muzzle of the gun, pull the trigger, and it's going to blow his brains out. Now how am I going to deal with it? I don't know. I wasn't trained that way. And we don't get that. We get 5150 in mental health training on how to deal with a suicide person, but we don't get how to deal with us being that person with the emotion after that call. That makes sense? So we got to get that information out somehow to say we're human, we're doing a job to be successful in that job, and after that job is over with, when all the adrenaline's over and all that pump and that hype of us, being that badass guy, that cop of saving the world, now we're de-escalating our lifestyle, and all those things happen. Heart problems, emotions and asthma and all that other stuff that we were kind of masking because we were in great shape. I mean, I gained 40 pounds after I retired. Okay. And now I eat donuts all the time. I didn't eat donuts as a cop. Didn't like them. Thought I was just kind of stupid. If I had a donut, I was cheating myself. Okay. But we kind of let yourself go after the fact, because now it's not one of those things where people are relying on me to save them anymore, or be that that partner that's in good shape. But I have my own struggles. Now I'm not the cop doing that job anymore. But it never identified who I was. I never let it get the best of me. So the codependency, I think I talked about.
Can I touch on something there, Mike? You said that you've never let that happen to you. How did you consciously do that? Because I think that it's an inherent thing that somehow this cape, this badge, this gun belt naturally seems to take so many people over, right? I'm with you. This is part of who I am. It's to a large extent, right? It's what I do, but it doesn't describe everything about me. How did you find that, for the people that are watching? How did you find that way? At what point in your career say, this is not going to define me? Because I think that's a huge part of the mental health capacity, is not letting it define you.
Yeah, it kind of goes along the lines of, in this generation today, most of the generation today is getting into this business because it's a cool job. Drive around in a police car.
Chase bad guys.
Well, I think you just touched it there. It's a job, right? For us, when you came on, you say, I'm going to spend a lifetime, a career doing this, right? It was kind of like a lifelong ambition. Now you get these new folks who are like, I'm going to try this for a couple of years and see how I like it.
And they like the paycheck, and then they go out and buy the boats and all that kind of crap, and the house, and get the wife, and then they get a divorce and get wife number 2 or whatever, whatever it is. But with what you said about how did I do it, you missed this in the first part of it, is that I started serving others I was 17 years old when I joined the Navy. Okay. I joined the Navy right out of high school because I was that know-it-all, that IKEA, all right, that I know everything asshole, that teenager that thought I knew everything. I didn't know nothing. Well, the thing that made me, that grew me and molded me into the person I am, to the Mike Zannitto I am today, and my family will tell you this, and my close friends will tell you this, is that the military saved my life. I would be that guy that'd probably be on probation or in jail or whatever, just because my mouth would get me in trouble. So I got my ass kicked in boot camp and started doing my service and realizing that that was the path I needed to take. I started as a reserve officer when I was in my late 20s after I got out of the military, because I worked as a nurse after I was a medic in the Navy and got out and then worked as a nurse. So I worked part-time as a cop because I absolutely loved being a nurse, because I loved helping people. If I had sick people, if I had people that were dying and I got to save them, I felt great. I didn't feel good that I saved them. I felt good that I was there to be able to save them and use my expertise. Okay. I took the selfish part of it out. So when I went to work in my career as a police officer, like I was telling Mike earlier, is that, when I started as a reserve, I was making $10 an hour. My job, my badge still said police officer. I had 4 numbers. The regular guys had 3 numbers. But you couldn't tell the difference. I did the same job they did. Carried a gun, all that kind of stuff. For $10 an hour. It wasn't about the money. Okay? When I got hired on to the police department, yeah, the paycheck was good and it was great, but it still wasn't about the money. Still bought my house, paid my bills, all that kind of stuff, but still wasn't about the money. It never was. When I stopped doing my police work, it hit me harder because I didn't miss the job. I missed the fact that they took away my status when I retired to help people, to continue to be that helper. We all wear different hats. We put on our dad hat, we put on our ball cap, we put on our nurse hat, we put on our cross on to give last rites to the gangster that just got shot up in the neighborhood or whatever. So you find that way to understand that you're there for a reason. The 2 things I said, if it's no longer fun anymore and it's just a job, I need to get out of it, because it's not like we're working in a real estate office. And I keep saying, I don't know what it is about real estate. I just keep throwing this out, but you can't just go get hired as a cop and be successful. Not everybody, this job's not for everybody. Okay. EMS is not for everybody. Being a paramedic, I've worked with lots of guys who were firefighters for their entire 30 years. They never were engineers. They never were captains. They never were medics. They just liked being a firefighter because they didn't want to see the blood and guts and all that kind of stuff. They were still exposed to it, that kind of stuff. But as a cop, it's not for everybody. So once you identify that job, that career is your career, you're on the right path. But the minute you start letting those other vices take over, that's where you start getting the problems. That's where the stresses happen. That answer your question?
Yeah, it makes sense. Because I think that whether it's the military or law enforcement or firefighter, it tends to become who we are. And I guess not stop there. A doctor, a lawyer, something that's somewhat outwardly serving.
Take a look at that if you can see that.
Okay, there you go. Right? Exactly. And we allow that to be some sort of shield or cape or whatever you want to call it. And that seems to define who we are. Right. And I know I missed the first part of this, but it's very powerful talking about when you're done. And I don't care if you worked for Amazon for 25 years. Once you've walked away, you're no longer part of a club. Right. As much as you hated going to roll call or turnout or whatever you wanted to call it, the day that it's done, you're like, damn it, I can't hang out with the boys anymore. I ain't got to listen to the Sarge talk crap or whatever. You miss that part of it. There's an addiction. And to go back just a little bit too, as far as like self-medicating, I think one thing that we forget too is in my belief that this job is also an addiction. And I'll speak for myself that doing this job has been my self-medication for my military stuff. It has helped keep bad dreams and other things away. And when I wasn't working a lot, or I'd go back on military status, which is a very low op tempo stuff in the reserves, those bad dreams and things would come back. So, I've been in the Army since 1995. I had a couple year break, and I've been in the reserves ever since. I did almost 9 years active, and I could retire, but man, there's an addiction to it. Like I don't want to, I don't want to quit the club. Number one, I have too much fun at it. I feel like I still have an impact on my soldiers, right? I still can mentor them and try to do my little part for our the military and our community to try to take these selfish young kids and try to mentor them to be more selfless, which is a hell of a challenge at times. But it's so rewarding, and it's like just not wanting to quit.
Yeah, I agree. And it's
And then any part of that, of what, Chris just mentioned, and, you mentioned yourself, Mike, to where, it was Christopher Hoyer, I kind of made the comment to him as well, too, that, sometimes when we retire, we're not necessarily just stepping out. We're jumping into another avenue where we're still in that same club per se, but, with your organization now, I mean, you kind of expanded your club to where you're not restricted to the your respective jurisdiction any longer, to where you get to go in all the different agencies, and like I said, you kind of broadened your club. So, and it goes back to what you were saying as far as like when you were 17, like at the beginning you were talking about how even before that you had the passion about wanting to help others and being a part of the helping of others. So I think it's something that's been ingrained in you your entire life. So, in that stepping out, like Chris just said, that being addicted to the job, to where with your organization, I mean, you're still carrying on essentially, except you're also looking back on, that phenomenal career you had, the things that you were exposed to, and, taking what then was a trauma and providing it as a blessing to others, because, now you have all of this to give. And there's nothing about being conceited. There's nothing about, you feeling that, oh, hey, I did all this. I mean, it's a blessing that you went through that. What Chris is going through, what Chris is able to give to other individuals and things like that, it really is a blessing to where, realistically, you're able to do more now for, fellow officers, military, medics, nurses, by stepping out and creating this organization. So, how much of, you having this organization, plays into, as Chris just said, that addiction of that, being in the club per se.
right. Yeah. And the other thing is, what have we been going through the last 18 months? The COVID stuff. Okay. So, I told you dispatchers, I personally consider dispatchers first responders.
And I love how that they're in the middle of that flag back there.
Yeah, even though they didn't respond, they're part of it. They're there. They're involved. Well, what are we dealing with today? COVID. Okay, nurses and doctors. They didn't sign up to take care of patients that are going to be in their ICU beds to die alone. They didn't sign up for that. Just like the rookie cop, he didn't sign up to go and shoot someone at his 5-year mark. He signed up to basically make a difference on the street and serve his community. So when those things happen, you gotta find that way to work through that and make sure that that you're going to be okay and you can process that. The thing today, it's nurses and doctor suicides are up. The numbers are up. I don't have the accurate numbers right in front of me, but they're up. They're happening. Even more now with this, the vaccine thing. Last year's heroes, today's threat.
And how much of that do you think, plays in part? I'm not going to say, being unappreciated, but with the past 18 months and with COVID, the unappreciation really is there. I mean, you see a lot of individuals a lot of hospitals and even offices that are discharging some nurses that are refusing to meet certain criteria or guidelines.
Right.
And you see so many of these nurses and these doctors that literally are saving lives, and it's the give back. Yeah, a lot of them, and it's the same thing what you were saying before, like, Chris touched on it, to where, we don't sign up to this for the paycheck. It's because, we want to go out there and serve the communities in which, we live and, respective jurisdictions. But in the same sense, it's the, that passion about helping individuals. With nurses and doctors in this, past 18 months, I mean, they have been facing, I'm not going to say scrutiny, but I mean, a lot's been put onto their plate, to where they're also witnessing it. And something that, we as, general public, we really don't see is, how many forced instances to where with COVID happening, there's a lot of individuals that they want to help, or a lot of individuals that could utilize their help. But a lot of those people coming into the doctor's offices, coming into the hospitals, are being put onto the back burner because of that, the overpopulation of COVID patients and things like that. But, again, with them, they see so many traumatic experiences on a daily basis. How much of that you think plays into, like you just said, not being able to, how many wellness checks were done on nurses or doctors? Almost every day is a critical incident for them, or they witness one every day. So,
right. There's a whole dynamic about it. Before COVID, they were going to work every day, doing their 12 hours, taking care of their sick patients and whatnot, in the semi-controlled environment, if you will. Okay. When COVID happened, and again, not to get political, the big hype is that there were people dying every day, hundreds of thousands of people that were dying every day,
right.
And, you get all these COVID beds that are all full, and the staff's overworked, and they're overwhelmed, and they're undersupplied and understaffed. And, they're not allowing family members to come in and visit these people. And now their last dying breath, all they see is this nurse. And nurses are, they're young by the most part. You're not going to get the 60, 70-year-old nurses, and most of them were leaving when all this stuff was happening. It's like it was time for them to throw in the towel, kind of thing. So these are all young people that are like they went to nursing school to basically help people, and then they didn't have, they needed 200 ventilators that particular week, and they only had 30. So now they're under equipped, and they can't do it. So they take that burden on themselves and go home and go, I couldn't do anything about it. There's nothing I can do. So there's the homeostasis, returning back to where we are now. Nursing's never going to be the same after what we went through for 18 months. Just like police work is never going to be the same again. At least I won't see the change. I'll be dead and gone before I see a change of police work where cops are not getting the one finger salute, they're getting the wave. All right. I grew up in that, I always got the one finger salute. I didn't grow up in a time where, the cops were praised and all that kind of stuff. Unless it was little kids, and they're running up to see siren. But I won't see that transition. Nurses are not gonna see that stuff either. And so it's one of those things where we got to figure out a way to find a way to tell those people that as long as their heart and mind's in the right place, and they're doing the things that they were trained to do, and they're performing their job the way they were trained to do, and they can lay their head on their pillow at night knowing that they did everything they could, and they're still not okay, then let's talk about that and let's process that.
And then do they fall in the same guidelines as, let's say, like critical incident with law enforcement? I mean, with the nurses, them seeing so much of that. I mean, like you just said, if they lay their head on their pillow at night and, then they want to deal with it. Or, I mean, do you say that wait that, 24, 72 or 48, 72 hour period for them as well? Or, at what point is it beneficial for them to start talking about what they just experienced? I mean, do they let it process to see if it's something they can deal with? Or, do they also, apply that same window? I mean, is it like that all the way across the board, whether it's, all first responders, basically, law enforcement, EMTs, firefighters, everything else? Is that something that, you kind of want to keep that same time frame to where, you kind of let it process first and then see how, you yourself are processing that said experience?
One of my struggles as a nurse early on was I had a real difficult time being empathetic versus sympathetic, and not personalizing things with my patients. It's hard. It's a harder struggle to do that as a nurse because you're providing care. As a police officer, you have to be empathetic and not be sympathetic, because you'll let your guard down more times than not, if that makes sense. Okay. You still want to show the compassion that you're there. You don't want to sit there, okay, you called us. So what? Somebody broke into your house. Big deal. I looked at it from the standpoint is that if that was my house and my house got broken into, how would I want the cop to respond? Okay. Not go there and say, oh, it's just another bird report. Okay, what do you got? No, you can personalize it to the standpoint to where you show empathy and show that you care about what happened in that person's house. Okay. But as the nurse, when I lost a patient, and I worked with pediatrics, so I worked, my focus was emergency room, pediatrics, and cancer kids. One of the big reasons why I got out of nursing was because the healthcare system basically took a crap and insurance was dictating how we were taking care of patients. We would get kids that would have the same exact debilitating cancer, and we'd have 3 kids, and 2 of them had insurance and the other one didn't. The one that didn't have insurance didn't get all the same cares. Same level of care, if you will. And that kid that didn't get it, he suffered more. One of the ones that got all the great cares and all that because they had good insurance, one of those 2 kids died. I took that to heart, took that home. One of the reasons why was that particular kid that I'm talking about, I had the same age kid at home. So it was hard to not personalize that and sympathize with that family of what they're going through, because if that would have happened to my kid, I would have been that parent. See where I'm going with that? Whereas the police department, and paramedics too. Paramedics, they can't personalize things too much either, because they're there to do their job, okay? But they just see that patient when they get to the house, then take them to the hospital, they're done. The nurse sees that patient when they get admitted to the hospital and when they get discharged, all the way through their cares. So there's going to be a different dynamic of caring, empathy versus sympathy on that side. But we as humans, we have to find that line to where what's going to work with us to make us be able to cope. So with COVID, the homeostasis, returning back to where we were in nursing, is that we've got to still understand that there's only so much that we can do to fix this issue of COVID. COVID's real. I'm not going to deny that. But it's nowhere near as bad on the Gambit scale that it is being reported. We all know that.
Not even close. Not even close.
Not even. It's unfortunate that we have to that we're fear mongering, if you will. But nurses have to know that they did their job the way they're supposed to, the way they were trained to, and they did everything they could possible. And the fact that the ventilator never showed up, that's not their fault. That's not their fault.
You know, another thing too, like with what you're saying, and the reason why this is kind of important, kind of like to touch base on, COVID's really not as bad as it is, marked up to be. Which, Chris and I touched on this during our broadcast, to where the media plays a large role on all of this. Okay, and it goes into like what it is that you provide, to where to making things seem okay to reach out to somebody. It's the same thing to where, the police being demoralized or, shunned, to where when you look at the real numbers, like when we were talking about like the fatal force incidents, to where the number is minuscule, like, because I always use the 2019 numbers because it's the most recent on the actual stats for, the Chamber of Commerce and everything else that you can actually pull the stats from. But to where 989 fatal force incidents out of 140,000 run-ins, it's nothing. And I don't want to try to play on the death, but it's the same thing with, the media pushing certain things to where they make it not okay. So, law enforcement faces undue hardships by us civilians, the very, civilians and communities that they're protecting, are lashing back out. Same thing with like the nurses and everything else too, to where, not knowing it's okay to reach out, or not having that media broadcast that, hey, Mike Zannitto and his organization, Peacekeepers for Life, actually offer the services for the nurses, first responders, things like that. It's the restriction causes more people to digress mentally, emotionally, and everything else. So that's why I like to do what I do, as far as they try to expose the reality and the truth behind everything else. But, how do we get to that point to where, even though the media feeds them, because you know how some people, I don't want to call people simple-minded and people to take it the wrong way. You know, sometimes people will see something on the news and they take it for what it is. Oh, hey, that must be true. You know, so, and then people become hesitant about reaching out to you, you know, trusting Chris and, you know, him responding to their call and things like that too, to where just when you were saying about how, you know, that kid, you know, you having a kid that same age, or, you know, responding to a home, and then like joining law enforcement and says, hey, I know I got a family at home too. You know, I want to make sure that, you know, for my family's sake, if not every family's sake, that the community is safe. You know, so how much of that goes into, you know, with all the fake news going on and the media pushing things that really are irrelevant, and it's putting that fear factor into a lot of individuals. And I'm not going to say it places more responsibility on law enforcement, nursing staff, and, you know, first responders in general. But, you know, how much since like in these past 18 months have you seen the difference in individuals reaching out, individuals being responsive of services?
One of the big struggles that I personally see is that people are afraid of being judged. People are afraid of being alienated. And this goes to nurses, doctors, I mean, police, fire, any EMS, any of that stuff. And Chris being a vet, I mean, he can understand the whole transition out of the military. It's a joke. You know, you go through boot camp, you go through all that stuff. They train you, get you ready to go fight, kill, you know, all that kind of stuff. And then when it's time to get out, they just kind of say, thanks, here's your diploma or your honorable discharge, and on to the next thing.
No, they teach you how to write a resume.
Oh, they do that now?
Well, in 2004, they did.
They didn't do that shit for me. Let me tell you. They just said, hey, guess what? Here's your medical and dental record, by the way. I'm like, what? Well, all right, fine, whatever. So okay, good. So they write a resume after 2004. Right on. So, but it's one of those things where if you tell people, and again, this is why I'm so passionate about getting the word out, is because I don't personalize it. And you know, you guys know my resume. You've seen my resume. But I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy. I'm no better than anybody else. I mean, education, none of that. I'm just a guy that has been exposed and seen stuff and have gone through stuff, and I've cried. I cried last week. I mean, I cried. One of the guys from one of the Marines that was in that unit that got killed in Afghanistan. Talked to the kid 2 weeks ago, and he killed himself 6 days later. I cried. I talked to him on the phone. Okay, and I took it hard. It got me. It personalized me. But it doesn't mean I'm codependent. It means I'm human. Okay, so when I go and I talk and I explain to people, and it's not, we check our egos at the door. I don't care if I'm talking to one of the hardest rooms I ever talked to was at the FBI Academy in Quantico. I was like, what am I doing here? I'm not gonna get. I don't hold a candle to any of these guys that are in here. And I'm talking to some guys that were spec ops, CIA guys, and they're special agents with the FBI and stuff. And I went with my dog, so my dog was like making.
Depends on your definition of that.
What's that?
Somebody walking in the background.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So I'm sitting in there in that dynamic, and I'm going, what am I doing in this room? And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm here for a mission. I got a mission. I got to get my word out. I got to say that it's important to understand that we're all human. We all signed up to do whatever career it is that we did, whether it's basket weaving, whether it's teaching, whether it's, you know, EMS, whether it's nursing, you know, whatever it is that we signed up to do. That we signed up. There's a reason why we did it. We all have our own reasons, but we're human, and we're going to have emotions, and things are going to affect us in a certain way. It doesn't make us a bad person. It doesn't mean we're broken. It doesn't mean anything. That's why the whole PTSD versus PTSI.
Right.
PTSD, shell shock, whatever you want to call it. It's an injury or an illness, and it can be fixed. It can be handled, and it can be managed, and you can recover from it very fine and have a fulfilling life. Okay, I've seen it firsthand. I've seen it firsthand, not only in myself, but I've seen it in hundreds of other people that I've dealt with in this last 6.5 years. And it's an amazing thing when someone who is struggling can come forward and say, I need help. Something wrong with me. Something's not right.
See, and with, yeah, I mean, and with what you do, you know, because, you know, a lot of people try to categorize, you know, first responders. You know, you have your law enforcement, you have fire, you have EMS, paramedics, whatever the case may be. But, you know, first responder, even with nursing, you know, everybody's held to a certain standard to where, you know, again, that fear of admitting something is wrong because of what's going to happen from administration. Well, you're not cut out for this job. You know, if you can't pull, you know, that dead baby from a fire or the garbage can or the dumpster, or, you know, go in and, you know, have a victim that's been shot, you know, it's that mental emotion that, you know, individuals have to deal with. That fear of talking about things, it's vital. And I love that's what you do in regard to, and, you know, you don't place a topic on it. It's first responders, you know, because it does affect everyone. And the dispatchers, they're the ones that are really overlooked almost 100% of the time, to where, you know, and Chris touched on it, to where it's the, you know, they send somebody out there and like wondering like how bad the incident may be, but they also never get that resolved to wonder like what happened with that call. You know, if a life was saved, if a life was lost, or, you know, what that approximate result was. So, you know, they can have that range of emotions just playing in their head all night long, because there's so many different possibilities of how it could have ended up, you know. Yeah. And that's why it's just, I love that it's like first responders, because, you know, like nurses, you know, nobody thinks about that psych eval that a nurse has to go through because of everything that they're exposed to on a daily basis. You know?
I did two critical incident debriefings. One was a bar shooting, and I did another one after the Route 91 in Vegas. The Route 91 one was people who were at the concert. They're not first responders. They're not anything. They're just moms and dads and, you know, sons and daughters that happen to see people get shot, and they've never even said anything like that. They've never seen anything like that before. And this was it wasn't, I don't want to say it was a critical incident debriefing, but it was more of an after action, if you will, at a support group. And there was 200 people in this room, that they basically had a chance for people to go up that felt like they wanted to talk about their experience there. And we had, I think the number that we had was like, I think there was 13 people that were from Orange County that were affected by it. I'm not sure the exact number, but there was 200 plus people in this room, and we're talking about these things and about stuff like that. And, you know, there was very few dry eyes in this room. But when you start talking about things that was seen and what were experienced and what people were exposed to, they were like rehashing it. So they were just everyday people. But the room full of cops, you know, that went to this bar shooting, that were there after the fact and saw the chaos and the carnage from what that person did. And then they see their partner that's down as a result of it. Okay. Now they've got to deal with that dynamic. And then after the fact, going to talk to the group of people that lost people in that particular bar shooting and talking to them. Again, they're not trained. They've got no, you know, they're just college kids. You know, they're just there. They're human. So it doesn't have to stop necessarily on first responders, but that's where my organization focuses, because we're still dealing with human people.
And I think if we're honest with each other, I'd be clear. I don't think any of us are trained. We're trained to respond to the things. We're respond to deal with the threats. But tell me an organization, even currently, that preemptively trains how to deal with the trauma, Absolutely. How to process it. I think in that aspect, we're all equally untrained.
Mm-hmm. We're all peers. We're all peers in that. And counselors, you know, counselors don't, you know, they're not trained either.
Yeah,
they're not trained.
And on top of that as well, too, it's kind of how you were just talking about how, like, you know, the 13 individuals were just, you know, the parents and everything else too. But I don't care if it's 10 people or 10,000 people. not only is it going to affect everybody in a different way, you're going to have that many different viewpoints on what actually happened from each one of those individuals. Even the first responders, because, whether it's on the perspective on how you're standing and, the view that you had of the incident, or, the direct reaction of how you perceived, that person's actions, the mannerisms, anything else too, but, how it affected you on the decisions that the other party made, and again, personalizing to where even if, I could take it more to heart that I watched somebody else lose a loved one than they did themselves. Because I could personalize it about my own family or anything else like that. So, processing things, outside of, just like first responders, because, the individuals in that moment as well, too, they have a heightened sense of that trauma, which is going to, heighten that PTSD, PTSI, from that point on. So, and then also, I'm not going to say first responders communicating with, the victims or the family of the victims and things like that. But I mean, to process everything like there, it's just, talking about it and being open to talk about it. But again, it is breaking that barrier of being comfortable talking about it, and that's why I can't stand where, speaking out about something that's bothering you is demoralized nowadays, or, in like today's generation, we can go on all day about, the softened generation that we're in today, but, everything's demoralized because, individuals that we call on, first responders, specifically, are supposed to be that rock, that foundation, that support, where it's still okay to, admit that something bothered you, or that, something is trauma that still plays in your mind about what could have been done differently if you would have responded faster, whatever the case may be. So, opening that door, and that's what, like, going in where, your program, Mike, you going in there, your organization going in there to where, starting at core level, as Chris stated, with the supervisors, to where they make these meetings mandatory, to where the whole agency is going. That way, those hard-shelled guys going in there, or women, going in there, to where they can still go in there with that little hard shell that they have, but, as you stated earlier, to where, you can, or Chris mentioned earlier about you sitting there, just sitting there, all of a sudden it's like hey, I do have something to bother me, because that is that way, to where you force individuals to engage, to where, hey, look, you know what, you don't have to come in here and talk, but come in here and listen to what they have to say. And I really think that's a big step, and that's why I think it's beautiful and it's great of what you do. And, I want to see this inside more agencies and, kind of exposing more individuals to come out and talk. And that's what really like Chris just said, I don't think we're ever going to have the way to make it to where everybody's prepared for, witnessing the trauma. But, we do have to prepare them to talk about it, to make it okay to talk about it. And it has to start at an early level. First, the cadets first going into training, like, we want you to know that, any incidents that do bother you, we want you to be open about coming in and talking about it. Like Mike, you said earlier that, come on, bitch, just, toughen up and come on, let's go handle this next one. You know what I mean? To where it has to be normalized to where things that are bothering an individual to talk about it. First responders all the way across the board, so.
Well, there's simple little things about, like, for example, the military. How old are you when you go in the military? 17, 18, 19, right? Okay. After 9/11 happened, how many kids do you think joined? And where did they go? They went right into freaking combat. And they were coming right out of mommy and daddy's house, right off the nipple, if you will, and right into combat. Okay. And they had whatever training they were given, and then they come back and they're not normal. I mean, kind of a cliche thing, but one of the slogans that I use in Peacekeepers for Life is, it never stops even when you come home. So that goes with anything you do in the first responder arena, the military, whatever. You never turn it off. You'll push it down while you're having that beer or that fifth of vodka or whatever it is. You push it down, or you go out and you shoot your guns with your buddies or whatever, but it's still not going to go away. You don't forget about it. And you may knock it down for 4, 5, 6, 7 months, years, whatever, but something's going to trigger it. I mean, today, Vietnam guys are dealing with a lot of shit that they dealt with when they were in Vietnam. And we're talking 50 plus years ago that they're dealing with today because of things that have happened just this last 18 months with COVID and the government defiance that's going on. Not to get political again, but the government defiance and the way things are happening in the country.
Well, on top of that, the VA with COVID, you know,
Right.
a lot of these veterans, they're not even able to go in and talk to their counselor as they used to. You know, some of them are trying to force the veterans to utilize the actual telehealth to where they speak to them, you know, via their phone or their
Video.
desktop.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't have access to that, or a lot of them don't have that. And then you have veterans today, you know, like I have family that a sound, a loud bang sets them off. And like you said, you know, we're talking 50, 60 years ago. And it's just like, but it's still there. And it's just like it was yesterday to them. And, you know, general civilians and just people, they really don't understand that. It's like, oh yeah, right. Hey, you're just fucking deal with it. To where it's not that simple for everybody. It's really not, you know. So it's the making it okay to talk about it, and it's the like with the veterans, like the VA. It's not that the people there don't want to do for individuals, but they're so understaffed. But again, going back to what you said, Mike, to where I don't believe that somebody that went to college and read a book should be talking to somebody that watched carnage day after day. You know, granted, not every military vet actually seen combat, but that doesn't mean that they're still not affected by, you know, the actual being in the service and knowing that went on. They could have had a brother that was, you know, in the combat themselves, lost or experienced situations and things like that. So it's just.
I will tell you on a personal level, and I know this is live, and I'm going to tell you this is the first time I've actually said this in a public forum. I suffer from survivor's guilt. And I say that because I was in the first Gulf War. It wasn't a war, it was a conflict. And my Gulf War vets will probably be pissed off at me saying that. But you know what? I truly believe in my heart that had we taken care of the problem back then, 9/11 probably wouldn't have happened. I take personal experience and personal survivor's guilt for that because I was part of that conflict that failed. Even though we kicked their ass and, you know, blew them out of the, you know, in the air, but 9/11 happened, and who's behind 9/11? Saddam, Bin Laden, all those knuckleheads. Okay, but had we taken care of them? But I struggle with that every day. That's one of my big struggles. But the way that I do that is that I show that through my passion to get the word out that I'm human and I have my struggles. But the reality is that there is light at the end of this tunnel. There is that stigma that we need to get rid of, which is why I'm pushing that PTSD, get rid of that D. It's I, it's injury or an illness. It can be corrected. It can be fixed. You can get recovered. You can recover from it and have a fulfilling and healthy life after the fact. Once you identify it and say, hey, I got a problem. I need help.
Yes, sir, Chris.
Sorry, guys, I've got to jam out of here. Mike, I appreciate your openness, your vulnerability, your strength that you're showing to everybody. I'm a huge advocate of this. I think that people just seeing these things will give people more courage. And again, it's a step at the grassroots level to try to normalize just the conversation. And I've said it 1,000 times. I don't think we're solving any problems here, but we're definitely taking the air out of the balloon so people back off that ledge a little bit. And that's just enough to save lives. So thank you for that, brother.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you. Be safe out there, Chris.
All right. And I'm certain we've met somewhere. I can't put my hand on it. Have you been to a HITS conference or something? I know I've seen you before. We've met before.
Was it HITS?
HITS.
Have
you been to HITS?
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago that I was
in Chicago.
Yeah, a couple of years.
Okay,
ago.
that's it. That's where it was.
Where it was. Yeah.
All right, Michael. Michael, thanks for having me. Mike, we'll see you, my friend.
Okay, yes, take care, brother.
Stay safe. Stay blessed.
God bless.
Thanks.
All right, Mike.
So, you want to get into the dogs?
Yes, I was about to. You know, because one of the things I do want to cover I mean, because I could go on for days and hours, especially talking to individuals that I have the same passions about, but I do want to kind of cover any kind of specifics that, individuals will want to reach out for the Peacekeepers for Life.
Okay.
And then, also I do want to get into the dogs because, a lot of times, I mean, and you'll get into, the provisions of that as well too. But a lot of times, that's just like with, some of my buddies actually have, the pets and everything, the vet dogs that sometimes that does, I'm not going to say cures, but it takes that PTSI part, and that is the treatment for it. It is the medication for it, to where they don't. Dogs didn't earn the title men's best friend for no reason. You know what I mean? But yeah, let's definitely get into that and everything else too, because I know that you travel as well. So
yeah, I the dog thing, it's always been a understanding and a comfort level with me. I was a canine agitator. I did the agitation, took bites with the bite suit and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to be a canine officer at one point in my career and just didn't work out for whatever reason. But it was one of those things where, dogs were they always had a special place in my heart. And when I worked at the hospital in California, pediatric hospital, we'd have therapy dogs and stuff that would come through, volunteer organizations and stuff. And just to watch that dynamic and put that smile on that kid's face who's suffering and that kind of stuff. And it was just kind of a cool interaction, cool dynamic, if you will. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I got put into a database through the VA, and I was picked out of a database that I was basically eligible and qualified for a service dog. And I thought to myself at first, I was like, I don't need a dog. I'm okay. I mean, I'm sure there's other vets out there that could really benefit from a dog, that I don't want to take it from somebody else. So I went back and I said to them, I'm not really, this is not really something that I need to venture out on right now. And so, well, let's look at it this way. The organization that you're doing, that you're associated with, and what the mission that you're doing, it can work on both sides. So I kind of slept on it a little bit, pondered a little bit with it back and forth. And I thought, that might be a good way to get this word out and help me get my mission complete, or at least pushing in the right direction. So took the dog, signed up with the dog, and I got assigned the dog in January of last year. I would fly to Georgia 1 week a month from January to May and do a week's worth of training until the second week of May, to when I was able to bring the dog home when we got certified. So we got certified as a canine handler and my service dog. My service dog's name is Abrams. It kind of started the infant stages of my next mission right there at that point. And with Paws Working Dog Support Network, that's who provided the dog. It's a nonprofit. They were based out of Blairsville, Georgia. And the trainer there, he trains other vets and other people who have a passion for dogs to be master trainers, if you will, to train service dogs, therapy, and emotional support dogs and whatnot. Well, when I got Abrams, I thought there's got to be more to this than just having a service dog. There's got to be more that I'm going to get out of this that's going to help other people and not just make it my dog. So I approached my trainer, Ed Abel, with Paws Working Support Dogs Network, and I said, hey, what are some things that I can do that might help you and your organization to get the word out about how we can get service dogs for veterans? They use a lot of rescues. So it's one of those things where he's in a small town in Georgia, but he's got a huge following and a huge network for dogs. So I thought, why don't, since I'm going out talking, I'll start plugging service dogs and therapy and comfort dogs. So when I'd go out and I'd talk, my dog would go with me and Abrams would go with me. I mentioned earlier about the FBI Academy. I go into this room, and it's during COVID. So I go into the room, and it's a room with about 300 plus seats, but there's only about 40 seats filled because of COVID. So the whole back wall of this room is all jumbotrons and huge televisions, and there's 300 plus agents from all over the world that are in this room during my 45 minutes of training that I have, that I'm given about resiliency and suicide awareness and PTSD and stuff. Well, the first thing I do is I walk in this room and I see this room and I'm going, man, what am I doing here? These guys are like, they're like, they're like my heroes. I mean, what am I don't qualify to be sitting here talking to them. And I drop my leash and I let the dog walk around, and he starts wandering around and kind of sniffing things out. And I kind of break the ice. I'm like, hey, hope nobody has any drugs, because he'll find them in your backpacks if he's got it. And they're they laugh. So Abrams goes and he walks around the room and he's just kind of there. And once he clears out the room, he then comes up and he sits down next to me and just kind of watches me as I'm going through my spiel. And I start talking about, hey, the importance of dogs and how, you don't necessarily have to have your own dog, but it'd be nice to have a dog in your department. So that way, if someone has a bad day or is having a struggle or has an incident, they can go to this place at the station and pick up the dog and take the dog back to their office, or take the dog back to, to where their workplace is for a couple of hours, and just kind of on with the dog and take a little bit of the stressor off of them. So that's the therapy and comfort side of it, to where anytime I go talk and plug service dogs and therapy and comfort dogs.
Remember how, like, way back in the day, like with firefighters, they always used to have like the little Dalmatians and all that stuff there.
Right?
Huh.
Okay. So starting this dynamic and starting this thought process for these police and fire departments, as I go around and I talk, I start thinking, there's more to the dog that you can get and benefit from it. So we started branching out and putting dogs with peer support teams and critical incident stress response teams, members on the team. So when they go out to these critical incidents, they take the dog, and the dog takes the stress and brings it down and de-escalates it. Okay? Started doing that talk, and my trainer at Paws Working Support Dogs Network says to me, he says, you know what? We want you to be on our board of directors. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't have time for that. But let's do this. Why don't I be your national spokesperson? Why don't Abrams and I be your national spokesperson? And guess what? We'll call ourselves the Canine Patriot, because I'm so patriotic. I'm a veteran. I'm a retired cop. Love America. God bless the USA. Blah blah blah. And he's my canine partner. So we started this Canine Patriot mission, to where now we go around and we educate and advocate on the effects of PTSD, police, fire, first responders, military, and suicide awareness, and the importance of dogs in that dynamic, whether it's on a personal level because someone needs a dog for their personal struggles, or they've got a department that is maybe not so big, or even big. Tried to get dogs with departments like LAPD and LA sheriffs, and then COVID hit and funding wasn't really a thing.
Right.
The thing that people don't understand, and that for those of you that are watching, there's no cost. There's no cost to the department. All we ask is for a donation. Basically, the dog is a free dog. He's trained. He's given and provided to the police department or the fire department free of charge. And all we ask is a donation. The last two departments we did 4 dogs. They donated a check for 10 grand to the organization. And that got 3 more dogs.
And then now another question too. So with the dogs, I know you say that they're trained. Do they all go through the same training that Abrams went through in Georgia? Or is there a specific training that all of your dogs get put through that, you have special? I mean, because, everybody has, training criteria. But especially with you, your background, and you knowing the effects of, you having Abrams and how much it's benefited you. So do you have specific criteria that all of these dogs that are trained are placed in these different departments and agencies? So, okay.
Service dogs under the American Disabilities Act is any dog that someone says that they have a disability. Okay? I can go to Amazon and I can go order a vest and put a service dog patch on it and call it a service dog.
Right.
Okay. Under the American Disabilities Act, people, businesses, all that are only allowed to ask what type of service the dog provides. Okay. Medical, whatever. They can't ask what kind of medical issue. No, they can't under the Disability Act. So you ask about training. Abrams went through PTSD and stress de-escalation training after he went through obedience training and the potty training and all that kind of stuff. When I went back for 1 week a month for 5 months, I went through handler training for a service dog. Okay. Once he and I did our bonding and we were matched up and we actually got along is when my training started. I have 200 plus hours of training, service dog handling training with Abrams specific. Then my trainer at Able, he signs off on it saying that I completed the training that was required for the course in order to certify Abrams as my service dog. The Canine Patriot part is that we're just now a service dog and handler dynamic or component that makes up Canine Patriot.
Okay.
Canine Patriot, we go out and we talk and educate and advocate on the importance of what dogs can do in the PTSD environment or the arena or the stress or catastrophic event. Does that make sense?
Who does it? Yeah, makes perfect sense. Now, who does that scheduling? So I know you were saying about, you and Abrams being the spokesperson or the spokes
The national
individuals.
ambassadors. Yeah.
Right. So, so now do they have, I'm not going to say are you required, but, do they schedule certain conferences or certain areas to where, you and Abrams are to go to speak? Or is that something that you take it in your own, you find the areas that you feel is important? So how does that all work?
What I did before I got Abrams, I would basically just go out and talk at conferences. I'd go attend conferences and I'd sign up to be a guest speaker. If it was something related to what it is that I talk about. When I got Abrams, I started looking at other organizations that would benefit from a service dog. Military organizations. I went to VFWs. I went to American Legions. And just basically, and it was more like just a meet and greet kind of thing. But as far as getting scheduled, most of it now is word of mouth, especially with COVID, because a lot of them are doing online. I don't like Zoom stuff. It's not personal enough. They can't really see me and my interaction with Abrams and that. Abrams is important. He's sitting down right next to me right now because he's just kind of checking out what I'm doing.
But that is vital, though, in trying to spread the message and to see the benefit of, like you said, doing a Zoom meeting or just like, having a meeting like this, that personalization between you and Abrams, because that's the reason why they're getting the dog or why you're, teaching them about the benefits of having the dog.
Right.
You can sit there and like show in a video. They don't know if it's a statue or anything else, you know what I mean? But, seeing that actual interaction, being able to see you do certain commands to Abrams.
How many takes in that video did it take to make that video,
right.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it's vital. It really is. Personalization is always greater when, you can add that. And that's the benefit of you going in. That's why I was asking some of the questions too, because, one of the things that I want to cover before, we end is, is there, like, how far in advance does an agency or an individual have to request, like, through your organization to come out there and speak to them? Like, so, is it a day, a week, a month, a couple months, or, how does the scheduling happen with, not just the Peacekeepers for Life, but also with, the Paws for dogs and everything, Paws and Warriors and the Paws working dogs. So how does the scheduling happen? How far in advance does someone have to request your services in order to obtain the services?
Well, I will tell you, it's no fault of your own. It's not services I provide because I don't charge anything.
Right.
All I ask is if you want me to come talk or you want Abrams and I to come and appear at an event, cover my expenses. if my airfare, you need me to fly to New York tomorrow, book me a flight, get me a hotel, pick me up at the airport. If I need
That's what I'm getting at. I mean, I know you don't charge, and and
cover that up.
That is something that I do want to kind of. So like once the live recording's done and everything else, because I'll do another kind of like a commercial.
Okay.
That actually shows everything, but I do want to promote it because that is like really huge in what it is you do. Is at no cost, and providing. I mean, how big of a deal is that? Just having to cover somebody's expenses, for what they provide and things like that. But even still, that's why I'm asking this question is for general public. As if it was them asking the question as far as how far in advance. So, if I wanted you out here, this coming weekend, all I'd have to do is, and then because you have a contact page on each of those sites, which individuals across the bottom of the screen, you'll see the sites that you can go to. But what's the best mode? So they just go under the contact page, or do you prefer like somebody sends you an email, or what's the best mode for individuals to reach out to you?
I'll tell you, the website talks about what we're about. Email is the best way to get in touch with me, and I'll when we do the commercial, I'll give you my phone number. It's my personal cell phone. Okay, I am a one-man show. My dog and I we're a one-man, one-dog team. But as far as if you called me tomorrow and said, "Hey, I need you in Boston on Saturday," if I got nothing going on Saturday, I'll be in Boston. It's not a matter of and I very rarely with COVID now that it's starting to lift and we're starting to get other things coming up and stuff. Events are getting calendared. So if you want to book something, reach out. Let's contact. And if I can make your event this month, and maybe it's a monthly thing, maybe I need to schedule it out 2 months if I've got something else going on. But I'm retired. This is what I'm doing. This is my passion. If I got to go to New York Saturday and be in Vegas on Monday, then let's work it out. We'll work it out. I'll make it happen if I don't have anything on my calendar.
Kind of what we were talking about earlier too, as far as once we do retire and kind of step out to where it's kind of like you get the finger rather than the wave, but it's phenomenal what you do. Like I can't commend you enough. I mean, it's beautiful what you do, and and especially how much this needs to be addressed. There's so many individuals that want somebody to talk to, but the demoralizing of it, or fear of insubordination, just because it's something fucking bothered you. You know what I mean? It's
right.
It affects a lot of individuals that otherwise would speak up, talk to their fellow brother, sister, or and because a lot of individuals do want to feel comfortable talking to their supervisors. But it's hey, how do we do that? You know what I mean? So, and that's why I love like the peer counseling aspect of it, to where it's the being able to go to somebody. I mean, it has to be put into place. And agencies need to have you come in there and kind of talk to them, not necessarily saying, hey, this is the way to do it. I have all the answers, IKEA, but but in the same sense though, it's your experience, you've been through it, is the being able to tell somebody, hey, I can know what you're going through, opposed to, well, I read Oliver Twist, and it's there's things that you can't get in a book. That right. You can get all the experience you've had, what you've seen, and you've been exposed to things that individuals should never have to be exposed to. I mean, realistically.
And I thank God every day that I'm able to do this. It's funny because sometimes, and there's people in my past that are like, why are you doing this? Why do you even care? It's like, what? Because I think that's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing today.
Not many people find their calling. Not many people do, and that's a blessing as well too. That you do recognize that, and it's a passion that you do.
And this is my last life's mission. I mean, I just turned 56 last month, so I got a few good years left of me, and as long as I can travel and all that, and I can still get on a plane and do that, I'll go anywhere. I mean, I went to Canada. I went to Canada last year, and I spoke in Canada, and that was an interesting thing. That was interesting. I'd never been to Canada, but it was interesting. And they do it. They're suffering just like we are here in the United States. They do police work just the same way we do here. So
it's not limited to just one demographic. It may change, and depending on culture and stuff like that as well too. Every agency's going to have their own inner culture and all that stuff as well too. But everybody has emotion. We're all human beings and stuff like that. So it affects everybody as a whole. So,
and like you said, I don't know it all. I just have answers and some information based on the things that I've experienced and been exposed to, and how I coped with them. You take it for what it's worth. Some people are going to be like, oh, this guy's whatever. It's like, okay, that's fine. But something's got to be done, because things that are happening today are not working.
The suicide rates are just unacceptable today. And on top of that, how high the numbers are, we don't have any new recruits going into the military. We don't have any new recruits going into law enforcement and first responders in general as it used to be. So, we don't have anybody coming in there to, kind of, witness the veterans or be given, that tool that, hey, look, if something's bothering you, talk about it. And, if agencies, don't see the importance and how vital it is that this topic is addressed and it's addressed immediately, they shouldn't be in administration, period. That's flat out. It's an epidemic, that's on a larger scale than anything else we've seen. It really is.
They're in a tough position, in that leadership position. They're in a really tough position. But like you said, you don't just sell your soul just because. You don't forget, where you came from. You can't do that. You still wear a uniform. You still wear a badge. You still have, some kind of expectation of leadership and caring, and it's still important.
And is there anything else you want to cover today, or?
No, I think we covered a lot of stuff. I really appreciate you taking the time and reaching out, Mike. This is good stuff, and I'd love to come back and touch on some more stuff at another time. It'd be great.
Well, and just so you know, so I'm getting a commercial together for it as well too. So starting October 17th, I know it's kind of like an odd date, but from the 17th on, I'm actually going to start a mental health awareness, the week for what I'm doing. I'm bringing a lot of individuals on.
Great.
I'll have Michael Segru on there as well too. He'll be on the 19th. But I'd love to bring you back on, because the more that we get together and have like-minded individuals that have the passions that we have about this, we'll be able to address on a larger scale, the issues that need to happen. Have more individuals comfortable about speaking up, speaking out, or just sending you an email by chance. You know what I mean? It's like hey, you don't have to talk to a fellow brother or sister. Hey, you send emails. That's why like my E33 here 24/7. That's the reason it's there. It's just because you don't have to talk to the people right there in front. And that's why I want to kind of, get with you, because I wouldn't mind, adhering that, or covering that cost to get you inside agency. So that's why I want to kind of, get you on here so we can kind of toggle back and forth, expose you to the public. I can go out and find different agencies that I can book you a slot to go in there and speak with them, because it is vital on what you do. It is vital on, them receiving your guidance, and they need to.
There's not an event too small. But ultimately, obviously, the more people I can get the word out to, the better. Conferences is a lot of my focus, but I'm going to Boston the 20th to the 26th for a meet and greet, and it's a big networking event in the mental health community. But it's primarily going to be like Boston, Massachusetts type, and New York. That's there for these two big organizations that are doing it. But again, to get the word out. I'm going to be in Arlington, Texas, on the first week of November 4th to the 7th. And it's a big meet and greet for big and rich, the country stars that are advocating for the mental health community and first responders and stuff. And it's going to be a little political, but Canine Patriot's going to be there representing to get the word out there as well.
I'm going to send you a IKEA T-shirt so you can wear to these events.
There you go. Make sure it's red, white, blue, though.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Mike, I appreciate your time greatly. And then for all the viewers at home, I'm going to have Mike's information is on the screen. It's running across that ticker. But I'll post this with all of his different websites, his email information. I implore you to reach out if, you yourself are just an officer or first responder. You yourself can reach out, but, also get with your agencies and to see if, you can get, Mike's services to come out there to, speak to the whole agency, or, forward his information on to others that, weren't able to join this broadcast, watch this broadcast, or have any resources themselves.
Anywhere. I do travel. It's anywhere. It just doesn't have to be just in Texas or California. I'll go anywhere.
Perfect. Again, Mike, it's a blessing, you jumping on here. I look forward to speaking to you again here in the near future. And, you, your family, and your organization, you stay safe and stay blessed in all you do, and you and Abrams.
Thanks a lot, Mike. You take care. Thanks again.
Always. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.